Chapter 12 Consciousness came slowly to Naruto. It was fuzzy at first, like a heavy blanket draped over his senses. But slowly it was lifting, and he became more aware of his surroundings. There were waves outside, and the sound of wave crashing against surf woke him further. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was, it was right, Haku. He hadn't died, and neither had Zabuza. Relief flooded through him as he lay on what was presumably a futon. But what had happened afterwards? After he had passed out? Had they left? Had Kakashi Sensei gone and finished him off? He didn't know. The sound of pages turning caught his ear, and slowly, he cracked an eye open to see who it was. Welcome back to the waking world, someone drawled from across the room. Naruto blinked and rubbed at his eyes, propping himself up on an elbow to see who had spoken. He was met with the sight of Kakashi Sensei propped up against the wall with his book, reading. Or he had been, Naruto noted once he noticed his eye was on him rather than the pages. Kakashi Sensei, Naruto croaked out, throat surprisingly dry and, despite the gravelly edge, voice questioning. Kakashi noticed and set his book down so as to give the boy his full attention. You've only been out for 2 days, he said, answering Naruto's unspoken question. 2 days. He echoed in shock. Yes, chakra exhaustion tends to do that to a person, was his sensei's almost snide remark, almost snide, because there was still concern in Kakashi Sensei's voice and in his statement. But still, it was a little jarring to Naruto, who had only experienced severe chakra exhaustion 2, maybe 3, times in his life. And those times were limited only to intense training and going all out in a fight. And he hadn't really gone all out with Haku. Not even close. Noticing his confusion, Kakashi Sensei explained. Do you remember the chains you summoned on the bridge? He asked. Naruto frowned, recalling the memory. He had been confused and surprised by them, but hadn't really put a lot of thought into it. There had been more pressing issues at hand. Like making sure Kakashi Sensei wasn't decapitated and that Sasuke didn't kill Haku or vice versa. That didn't mean, however, that he didn't recognize them. He had seen his mom use them to hold down Kurama when he had stolen the beast's chakra. But thinking back, how had he summoned those? They are a rare Uzumaki Kekkei genkai, Kakashi Sensei filled in. I've only seen them once before, and, quite frankly, I'm surprised you managed to awaken them yourself, he continued. Using them the way you did at that power must have drained your reserves more than any jutsu you're used to. So it's natural you'd suffer chakra exhaustion. Wait, Naruto said, sitting up straight, ignoring the wave of dizziness that washed over him from the action. I have a Kekkei genkai. For real? Kakashi Sensei nodded solemnly. It would appear so. Naruto blinked, taking it in. He had a Kekkei genkai. The Uzumaki clan had a bloodline skill. He really shouldn't have been surprised, considering he'd managed to pull it off, but some part of him still had doubts that it was just his mom, somehow. Or some other reason he couldn't think of. To actually think that it was his own power he'd managed to unlock, instead of some other borrowed power, it was amazing. He could hardly wrap his head around it. Wow, he breathed. Then, in a louder voice he exclaimed, I'm awesome, you know. Take that Sasuke, look who's got a Kekkei genkai now, you know. I think you're getting a little too excited over this, Kakashi Sensei voiced, sweat beading on his brow. Are you kidding, Sensei? Naruto exclaimed, punching the air in excitement. My clan has something special. This is great, this is. His sentence was cut off by the world suddenly swimming around him, and he pitched towards the floor. He would have stopped himself, but his body refused to react. He never hit the ground though, strong hands catching him before he did. Perhaps getting overexcited while chakra exhausted is a bad idea, His sensei hummed, laying him back down on the futon. Naruto could only offer a weak, yet hearty, smile in response. The Jonin moved back to sit against the wall again, arms folded in front of his chest in a relaxed pose. I would suggest you rest, but knowing you'll keep pestering me with questions, Kakashi Sensei mused in good nature. Am I right? Naruto's face broke out into a guilty grin, and a long sigh escaped the Jonin, but Kakashi didn't really seem too put out by the reaction. Oh, all right, he sighed. Ask away. Naruto opened his mouth to start his badgering, but was cut off by the sound of footsteps outside before the door was pulled hastily open. Is everything okay? We heard shouting, asked the newcomer. Naruto looked up to see who it was and was pleasantly surprised to find Sakura and Sasuke standing in the doorway. Ah, Sakura, please come in, their sensei greeted. I was just explaining to Naruto about his new Kekkei genkai. Naruto watched as Sakura's eyebrows rose comically high on her forehead. Her eyes widened and flickered over to Naruto as though to confirm that, yes, this was who Kakashi-sensei was talking about. A Kekkei genkai? She asked, still unable to believe it. Yeah, he laughed. Guess I'm just that awesome, you know. Sakura frowned as she took her seat by him. It was almost cute to watch. But you never had a Kekkei genkai before, she mused, referring to how in the past timeline he had never awakened such a power. And if Naruto was being honest, he was thinking the same thing. How had he never discovered it? What was different about this time around that he did? He remembered using Kurama's power on the bridge last time, but that was a response to seeing Sasuke supposedly die in front of him. That hadn't happened this time though. This time he wasn't as angry. He was desperate. Kekkei genkai are sometimes awakened by strenuous circumstances, or severe emotions, Kakashi-sensei cut in, oblivious to what Sakura had actually meant. For instance, Sasuke awakened his Sharingan, and Uchiha Dojutsu which he didn't have before. Naruto's eyebrows rose up his forehead as he turned to his teammate. Really? He asked, giving Sasuke a searching look. He still had his fully formed Sharingan, not the 2-in-1 Tomo he'd originally had. How had he managed to swing that without incurring suspicion? The Uchiha merely shrugged, unwilling to expound upon it himself. Naruto's shoulders slumped, but he accepted the silence. He would badger him later during their secret meetings anyway. Another thought suddenly occurred to him. Wait, he started, turning back to his sensei. What about Haku and Zabuza? What happened after I blacked out? Oh, Sakura started. Right. Inari and the other villagers arrived to help. But they were a little late. Haku and Zabuza agreed to give some of Gato's money back to Wave and they're still hanging around town. Haku wanted to speak to you before they left. Left. Naruto frowned. To where? Sakura shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips as she whispered. I may have told them about the revolution being planned in Kiri. Zabuza seemed to like the idea and agreed to go back and help. For some reason the mention of Mei Terumi piqued his interest. More like another part of him, Naruto thought, recalling Mei Terumi and, more specifically, her looks. So that's that, Kakashi-sensei cut in mildly. We managed to clean up the bridge while you were out, and since it's almost done, Tazuna thinks we'll be able to leave within the week. Naruto nodded. That was good. He couldn't wait to get home and tell everyone all about their mission. Neither could Sakura or Sasuke by the looks of it. They had all been starting to get some form of cabin fever over the last few days. As great and exciting as this mission was, they'd rather be focusing on the future and preparing for that. However, his sensei continued. All three genin let out a groan. What now? You will be on bed rest for most of that week. What? Naruto cried, jolting in his seat. That's unfair. Come on, sensei, you didn't stay in bed all week. Why do I gotta? Ma, Naruto, Kakashi-sensei sighed in defeat. Can't you just follow orders once in your life? Not when they're lame orders, he shot back. Then something flashed in his sensei's lone eye, and Naruto stiffened in response. Sakura, Sasuke, don't you have somewhere to be? He asked, his tone hard and filled with an authority the two had hardly realized he was capable of. Sakura nodded quickly and got up, ushering Sasuke to do the same. With an apologetic glance back at Naruto, she and Sasuke quickly left the room, leaving Naruto to face whatever Kakashi-sensei had to say to him alone. Naruto gulped nervously. Naruto, his sensei said seriously, forcing his attention. I don't think you understand just how much danger you put yourself in, he said. Unleashing a Kekkei genkai that powerfully your first try, on top of forcing your body to work through the injuries you'd received, you could have been seriously hurt. If not dead. His words were heavy, but rang with truth. Overcome by the guilt the Jonin's words instilled, Naruto looked down at his lap, fingers twisting the blanket around absently. I swore I'd never let my comrades die, he continued. And that means protecting them from themselves, if I have to. A lump formed in Naruto's throat, thick and painful. I'm sorry, sensei, he murmured. I didn't realize. Kakashi-sensei let out a low sigh, shoulders slumping some. It's alright, Naruto, he said. Just make sure you never push yourself like that again. I can't promise that, Naruto thought to himself despairingly. I'll do whatever I have to protect my comrades. Even if it kills me. Even if it means facing a goddess, or accidentally being sent back in time. Okay, sensei, he said quietly, not meaning a word of it. Chapter 13. The next few days went by surprisingly quickly. Naruto found that he really was exhausted, and spent much of the first 2 days sleeping. Of course when he was awake, he was being badgered by Inari for awesome stories and asking to be shown the cool chains his grandpa had talked about. Naruto had done the best to tell him stories, but when it came the second request. Suffice to say, Kakashi Sensei's threatening glare quickly closed that option down. In fact, his sensei was so against it that he'd forbid him from even trying to use them until they were back in Konoha and had given their report to the Hokage. Naruto thought that was a little overkill, but he wasn't about to argue with the Jonin. Over the next few days, when he'd started to get up and move about, he'd asked about his jacket, which he hadn't seen since waking up the first time. Eventually Sakura came around and admitted it had been destroyed by Naruto's chakra chains. They had left huge, irreparable holes in the fabric that left it too mangled to wear. Thankfully they hadn't thrown it away, but only because Sakura had known just how much he loved the thing. It had come as a huge disappointment to him, but there was nothing he could do. So he settled for wearing just his t-shirt remaining instead, as the other had also been destroyed by his chains. When they got back to Konoha, he would have to do some serious shopping. Aside from personal grievances over lost clothing, the other thing that occupied Naruto's time was Sasuke. He tried to kill Haku on the bridge, and only just failed because of Sakura's intervention. None of them had discussed it yet, but given the frigid air around them whenever they were all in a room together, something would have to give. But it seemed that something could wait until they got back to Konoha. Maybe. Finally, the day they were set to leave, Haku showed up at the house. All 4 members of Team 7 as well as Tezuna's family were eating breakfast when there was a polite knock on the door. Opening it up, everyone was surprised to find Haku standing there in his kimono holding a covered basket. "Haku!" Naruto exclaimed, getting up from his seat. The boy in question offered everyone a kind, nervous smile in return. Tezuna gave the boy a curious look, but stood aside to let him in. Haku gave a small nod of thanks before stepping inside. "It's good to see you well, Naruto," Haku offered, standing before them. He looked slightly awkward, holding himself stiffly, head bowed slightly in formal greeting. Thanks," he said. "You wanna sit down or something?" Across from him, Inari was shooting the newcomer confused looks, wondering who the boy was. "I just came by to wish you well before you headed off back to your village," he said in a polite tone, accepting Naruto's invitation and sinking into the cushion next to him. "What's in the basket, sis?" Inari interrupted, leaning across the table to try and see for himself. "Haku's a boy, Inari," Sakura told him flatly. Inari's eyes went wide, and a blush appeared on his face. "I knew that," he cried, embarrassed, scrambling to sit back in his seat. Haku let out a small chuckle at the display, clearly not insulted. "It's all right," he said. "And as for my basket, I suppose it is a parting gift. Since you are leaving today, I thought bringing something to show my gratitude was in place." Opening it, he showed them all loaves of sweet Hokkaido milk bread, along with various fruits from around the region. Shifting the bread and fruits aside, he showed them what was underneath. "Sinbon and poisons from our region for Lady Sakura," he said. "I recognize that you used a sedative on me on the bridge. I believe you would be good learning the art of poisons and the like." A blush appeared on Sakura's cheeks, painting her face the color of her namesake. "Oh, that's you don't need to call me, lady," she tried, graciously accepting the gifts. "And you didn't need to get me these. It's quite all right," Haku replied easily. "I recognize your dream to become a great medic. You don't need to use these poisons, but learning from them might help you." "Thank you, Haku," she said softly. "Wait," Naruto cut in. "Why are you doing this?" There was a moment of silence from Haku before he responded. It looked as though he were collecting his thoughts, trying to make sense of them in his head before sharing with the world. Finally, he said, "On the bridge, you called me your friend. I've never had a person to call a friend before." Naruto blinked, surprised. "I've been alone my whole life. Lord Zabuza was the first one to make me feel like my existence mattered, but I cannot call him a friend. He is my master, and that is all. I'm sorry you've been so alone, Haku," Kakashi Sensei said from the side. Haku nodded in acknowledgement. "Well," Naruto said, shifting slightly where he sat. "I'm glad you're not so alone now. I know how awful that is." Haku returned the comforting words with a soft smile, eyes twinkling with gratefulness. "You also helped me realize something I never had before," Haku continued. "Without Zabuza, I thought my existence meant nothing. You helped me realize there is more to having a dream than just existing." "So, what is your dream?" Naruto asked. Haku gave them all a smile. "My dream is to help Lord Zabuza achieve his dream of peace within Kiri. Even if I fail to protect him, I can still go on to help realize that dream." That is my goal. Naruto smiled widely. Out of corner of his eye, he saw Sakura do the same. Even Kakashi-sensei looked pleased. I'm glad. Naruto said. I hope you can achieve your dream. Haku's smile softened before he replied. And I hope you do as well, Naruto. I hope to one day see you become Kage of your village. Naruto grinned widely. You bet, he said. And he would. He definitely would. Saying goodbye to Tizuna and his family involved more tears than Naruto remembered. Mostly from Inari. The boy wouldn't stop bawling all the way to the bridge, and clung to Sakura when they were all saying their goodbyes. Apparently when she'd saved them she'd left quite an impression. You gotta teach me those cool moves of yours someday, Inari managed to say through sobs as he hugged Sakura within an inch of her life. Of course, she tried, sweet dropping. And Naruto. He cried, finally breaking away from the poor girl. I'm gonna become a hero someday, just like you. Ha, I don't doubt it, Naruto chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair through his hat. I bet you'll become super strong too, someday. Just like your grandpa. The boy just burst into tears again. But they were happy tears, so it was alright. Well, Tizuna said, interrupting his grandson's sobs. I wish you all a fair journey back. Thank you, sir, Sakura nodded. With a few more goodbyes, they were off, walking down the length of the newly named Great Naruto Bridge. Sakura had rolled her eyes when Tizuna had told them, but Naruto hadn't stopped beaming. It was almost annoying, but she wasn't going to put on a damper on his excitement, so she let him be. It seemed the other had the same idea, as neither had spoken up against the blonde. Over the course of the day the excitement from the past week slowly left everyone until they were merely trudging along, eager to get home. For lunch they stopped by the side of the road and dug into the basket of food Haku had supplied them with that morning. But not before Kakashi-sensei checked all of it for poison, much to everyone's dismay. Once he'd cleared the food, they dug in. Sensei, Naruto piped up around a mouthful of fruit. Kakashi-sensei, who had already finished eat and had returned to reading his book, hummed to show he was listening. What do you know about chakra chains? He knew his sensei had been his father's student, and as such, had to have known his mother and maybe even something about her Kekkei genkai. It was a long shot, but Naruto was desperate to know anything about his heritage. Ma, I can't say I'm an expert, his sensei drawled. But I do know a little. Yeah, Naruto pressed. The ruffle of pages sounded before he replied, supposedly giving him a moment to think. It's a very powerful form of sealing, so to speak. It keeps the ending immobilized, and are near impossible to break. Unless you're a Biju, Naruto thought to himself, remembering when Kurama had snapped his mother's chains when Naruto had stolen his chakra. So how is that a form of sealing? Sakura asked from the side, propping herself up on her elbows. Ma, I'm just repeating what my sensei told me, Kakashi-sensei said, giving them an apologetic eye smile. He knew more about the Kekkei genkai than anyone. Did he have it too? Sakura asked dumbly, knowing full well that Minato Namikaze did not, in fact, have the Uzumaki Kekkei genkai. No, but he was close with someone who did, he said, and left it at that. So Naruto started again. How rare is the Kekkei genkai? How awesome am I for having it? You know, Naruto, Kakashi-sensei noted slyly. Most people are subtle when fishing for compliments. Sensei, Sakura chuckled. When has Naruto ever been subtle? Ma, that's true, Kakashi-sensei hummed. Naruto frowned despondently. It was true, but he shouldn't say it. He was supposed to encourage growth as a sensei, not ridicule. Hey, Naruto moaned. Instead of a reply, Kakashi-sensei gave him one of his signature eye smiles, complete with annoying smugness to boot. We're getting off topic, Sasuke cut in, finally joining the conversation. He was sat some distance from the group over by a tree, half a roll of sweet bread in hand. As much as I don't want to hear Naruto brag, I am interested in learning about his Kekkei genkai. Naruto shot him a confused look, completed with a raised eyebrow and head tilt. Since when had he been so interested? Ma, fine, Kakashi-sensei said with a sigh. Although I don't know what there is to tell that I haven't already said. Well, how about how it's used? Sakura suggested. You must know that, at least. Kakashi-sensei seemed to think about it for a bit before responding. While he was thinking, an almost somber look flashed across his eye. It looked painful, but it was brushed aside almost immediately. Naruto couldn't even be sure that he'd seen it, it was so fast. Well, the way I saw them used was for containment and barriers. Defensive, if you will. When did you get to see it? Sakura pressed, fascinated. The third shinobi war, he replied coolly. I must have your guy's age at the time, so I can't remember specifics, sorry. He didn't sound all that sorry. Just sad. Well, Naruto tried, slightly disappointed. How many could they used? How long could they use them? How did they use them? Do you remember that? He made a point not to say, she, as that would have tipped his sensei off that he knew just who exactly the last Uzumaki in the village was. Slow down, Naruto, Kakashi sensei said with a soft chuckle. I'm sorry, but I really don't know that much about them. Naruto's shoulders drooped in disappointment. Dismayed, his sensei spoke up again. Perhaps when we get back to the village you can ask the Hokage, his sensei tried, uncertainty just barely coloring his voice. I'm sure he'll be able to tell you more. Twisting his lips in though, Naruto mulled over what Kakashi sensei had said. He was right, that maybe Lord Third knew more about his Kekkei genkai than anyone else in the village, but for some reason he doubted that he would willingly open up about it. The man had hardly ever spoken of his parents, even in the abstract. Asking about his mother, even if indirectly, would surely not end well. Yeah, I guess you're right, sensei, Naruto said anyway, trying not to convey his doubts. He had a feeling the Jonin heard them anyways. Hey, Sakura said lightly, bumping his shoulder playfully. Even if Lord Third doesn't know anything, we'll find as many scrolls on it as we can. Even if it takes a bit. Right, Sasuke? The other boy let out a HN, but didn't seem disinterested in the idea. Naruto smiled. He really did have the best friends. Chapter 14. Finally, Naruto moaned, stepping through the gates of Konoha. He was hunched over in a weary gait, backpack threatening to slip over his shoulders because of it. Beside him, Sakura seemed a little sweaty from the heat, but otherwise fine, while both Sasuke and Kakashi sensei were apparently too cool to be tired. Dicks. You can't honestly be the tired, Naruto, Sakura deadpanned, staring at him with the most unimpressed eyes he'd ever seen on her. Okay, that wasn't true. He'd been on the receiving end of worse, but that wasn't important. Ma, behave yourselves, you two, Kakashi sensei said idly, not even appearing to be paying attention to them as he walked them over to the gate guards. Azumo and Kotetsu were there to greet them, just as they did before and after every mission. While the Chunin were filling out the proper paperwork, Kotetsu leaned over and gave Naruto a funny look. What happened to the jacket, Naruto? He asked, genuinely confused. I thought you wore that thing everywhere. For a moment Naruto was confused about how he knew that, as they hadn't ever formally met in this timeline, then realized he must have been one of the Chunin that chased after him when he set off a large prank or defaced public property. Oh, it got torn apart by chains made of pure chakra. Training accident, he said instead, offering the Chunin an embarrassed smile. Kotetsu seemed to think nothing of it and merely shrugged. After they finished filing their paperwork for re-entry, the four started off to the mission desk to file their report. It was going to be an interesting one, for sure, Naruto figured. He remembered how crazy it had been. Telling the Hokage that the mission was actually an A rank was crazy enough. Telling the Hokage that it was an A rank this time, on top of everything else that had happened, was sure to be an interesting affair. Not only had they confronted one of the 7 swordsmen of Kiri, but they'd also not killed him as would be advised, made friends with his apprentice, and also unlocked a few Kekkei genkai along the way. They hadn't talked about it much, but Sasuke, unlocking a final stage Sharingan was sure to raise a few eyebrows. Oh well, they'd burn that bridge when they got to it. Or was it cross? Naruto shrugged. It didn't really matter. The point was that they'd do what they did best when the time came. Wing it. During the walk to the mission desk for their mission debriefing and report, Kakashi's mind was focused solely on one thing. Naruto. Or more specificity, what Lord Hiruzen was going to do about him. The boy had unlocked an amazingly powerful and rare Kekkei genkai and had thousands of questions about it that Kakashi couldn't answer. While he knew more on the subject than most people, he was far from being considered an expert. So on that front alone he wanted Hiruzen to take charge and step up. Then on the other hand Naruto must surely be dying to know about the last Uzumaki to have them. He'd want to know all about them, as he'd never met another one of his clan before. Unfortunately, Kakashi couldn't give him what he wanted. Another reason he wanted Hiruzen to deal with his little Jinchuriki. Of course Kakashi wanted more than anything to tell him all about it. To answer any questions he might have. Questions about his clan, his predecessor, anything. Naruto deserves to know about his heritage. But when his heritage is an S-class secret, there was little Kakashi could do. Sensei. You okay? Kakashi blinked, taken out of his reverie by the very genin he'd just been thinking about. Looking down at Naruto, he was met with concerned blue eyes. Eyes that seemed a little too old for the face they belonged to. "Ma, just lost in thought," he said easily, brushing him off. Naruto frowned at the response, but accepted it nonetheless. Kakashi watched his student turn back around and was reminded painfully of how close he'd come to losing him. Back on the bridge, when he'd seen golden chains erupt from the dome of mirrors, it was like he'd seen a ghost. And when the boy had crumpled to the ground, he'd been terrified he'd lost him. That after these years he'd failed at the one thing he'd swore he'd never do again. Lose a comrade. The sight of his sensei's son, lifeless on the ground, was almost too much. He hadn't yet grown close to the boy, not like he had with his own team in the past, but the protective instinct was still there. As was the memory of kind blue eyes and bright smiles from his sensei. When he rushed over to check his pulse and found it going strong, and when Sakura informed him it was just chakra exhaustion, he could have fallen to his knees in relief. But he didn't. He was a jonin, and he had to stay strong for his students. So he had. For 2 days until Naruto woke up. When the boy had immediately started shouting about how cool he was, Kakashi finally let himself relax. Of course, he had immediately forbid him from even trying to use his chakra chains again. Naruto had been put out, but seemed to have understood his reasoning. Kakashi was glad. He didn't feel like getting into another argument over it again. Now that they were back in the village though, Kakashi had a sneaking suspicion that the boy would spend every waking moment trying to master them, and obviously exhausting himself in the process. Geez, he really needed adult supervision. In a striking moment of panic, Kakashi came to the startling realization that he was the adult supervision. That was a horrible idea, he thought to himself, inwardly cursing Hiruzen for ever forcing this responsibility on him. Whatever, he would figure it out. He always did. With a sigh, Kakashi settled for going back to reading Ika Ika to distract him while they made their way to the mission desk where he was sure to be chewed out by the Hokage. After a long retelling of events and explaining how their mission had turned from AC rank to an A rank much to a certain Chunin's chagrin, Lord Hiruzen finally let out a long sigh. Upon arriving, Iruka had immediately asked Naruto where his jacket was, as the boy wore it everywhere. With a frustrated sigh, Naruto had explained it had been destroyed by a jutsu before the 3 genin had launched into their tale of how the mission went. Finally they were finished, and neither Hokage nor Chunin seemed entirely thrilled by it. With his hands clasped in front of his face, Hiruzen gave Kakashi a accusatory stare, as if to say, "And you allowed this?" Kakashi merely attempted an faux innocent eye smile, but gave up when he realized Hiruzen saw right through his bullshit. "Well," Hiruzen finally managed to say. "That was quite an adventure you 3 had," he said, addressing Kakashi's genin. "I'm glad you have all made it home safely." "Thank you, Lord Hokage," Sakura said, dipping her head in a bow. The other 2 followed suit. "Seeing as this has complicated some things, I would ask for you 3 to excuse us while we sort some things out," Lord Third said. "Iruka, would you escort them out of the room and help them fill out their mission reports?" The Chunin nodded and got up to leave, shooting an expectant glance at the 3 genin. Naruto frowned and looked to Sakura then Kakashi for affirmation. Sakura shrugged in acceptance. It seemed the adults needed to talk. After watching the 4 shinobi leave the room, Kakashi turned back to Hiruzen. There was a moment of silence between them before Kakashi took the initiative to speak up. "Naruto unlocked his mother's Kekkei genkai," he said bluntly. "I'm aware," Hiruzen said, voice heavy with something Kakashi could only relate to wisdom and burden. "It won't take long for other nations to realize his heritage," Kakashi continued. "Kushina Uzumaki was famous for her chakra chains. She was kidnapped as a child because of it." Hiruzen remained silent. "One way or another, Naruto will find out. And when he does he'll have questions." It was a threat. Kakashi was never of the mind to keep Naruto's parents' secret from him. The boy deserved to know the man he looked up to was his father, and how his parents were heroes to the village. On the other hand he did see the reasoning behind it. Minato and Kushina had many enemies. Enemies who'd be glad to get their hands on their child. But now that he was a full-fledged shinobi there was no reason to continue keeping it from him. And that was what Kakashi was getting at. "You suggest telling him," the Hokage surmised. Kakashi only gave a small nod in response. "I'm sorry Kakashi, but I cannot advise that course of action. It is far too dangerous." Anger boiled inside Kakashi as he listened to the man. He'll be in danger regardless, he argued, forcing his voice to stay level despite the emotion inside him. How long do you think it will take somewhere like Kumo or Iwa to figure out who he is? An Uzumaki with chakra chains is already enough to get him put in bingo books by the time he makes Chunin. An Uzumaki with a striking resemblance to the fourth Hokage will be immediately put under scrutiny, Kakashi argued. It doesn't matter if you tell him, he'll already be a target. It would be better to prepare him for that than send him out into the world blind and hope for the best. Kakashi watched as Hiruzen silently contemplated his words. The pensive look on his face betrayed nothing, as was expected from him. But to Kakashi it just frustrated him. He couldn't tell if his words had swayed the man or not. Eventually, the man unclasped his hands and leveled the Jonin with a firm look. I appreciate your thoughts, Kakashi, he said. The tone set the Jonin on edge, and his metaphorical hackles rose. But I must disagree. He's far too young now. He shall remain in the dark until the proper time comes. A sigh. I'm sorry, but it will have to wait. Clenching his teeth, Kakashi forced himself not to show any anger or frustration at the order. That was no excuse. Despite his anger, Kakashi schooled his features into something resembling respect to the Hokage. I understand, he finally ground out, bowing to the man in preparation to leave. Just as he made it to the door, Hiruzen's voice stopped him. Kakashi, he called out, halting his movements. Kakashi turned to look over his shoulder, not bothering to give the man his full attention. The action was noted by the man. I trust you to keep it secret. Kakashi didn't even bother responding as he slipped out the door. Chapter 15. After filling out and submitting their reports, Kakashi-sensei had dismissed them for the day with the order that he doesn't see any of them for the next 2 days. All 3 genin were just fine with that and each went their separate ways with the promise to meet at the memorial stone that night. None of them had really had a chance to go over the mission, or rather Sasuke's actions, since the battle on the bridge. But as things grew more tense between them, they quickly realized that needed to be remedied. But that meant they still had the rest of the day to themselves with nothing to do. Naruto would have loved to run off to the training grounds and try out his chakra chains, since they were now back in the village, but Sakura and Kakashi-sensei had forbidden him from even trying without a higher-ranking shinobi or medical ninja present. Naruto thought it was overkill, personally, but he didn't argue. Iruka-sensei had offered to take him out for ramen though, probably so he could make sure he was okay after all that had happened, but that was hours away. Which left him with a half a day to kill. So you're off back home? He asked, stopping to wait for Sakura as she followed him out of the building. Yeah, she said. My mom and dad will be worried enough as it is that I left the village. When they hear it was an A rank they're gonna freak. Naruto winced in sympathy. Did they freak last time, too? You have no idea, she moaned. Chuckling at her misfortune, Naruto waved her off as she started her walk home. He should probably get home too, he figured. His poor plants needed to be watered, and he didn't trust that Konohamaru had kept up with the schedule he'd set for him before he left. It was weird though seeing him as an 8-year-old again. He was used to seeing him and his crew wearing leaf headbands instead of goggles, like they now were used to. Arg, this time travel business made no sense. Turning the key to his apartment, he was pleased to find all his plants alive and well as all the food in his fridge thrown out. He remembered he'd forgotten to do that the last time and came home to extremely sour milk and moldy cheese. Good job, Konohamaru, he smiled. Setting his bag down, he told himself he'd unpack it later and decided to take a shower, washing away all the grime of the road. Once he was clean and dressed, he found himself sitting in a very empty, very boring apartment. Well, this sucks, he muttered, sitting on his bed. What would he have normally done after a mission back when he was actually 12? Probably have gone to Ikiraku's. It wasn't a bad idea, he thought, but that still left a lot of time before Team 7's meeting. And training was out of the question. Suddenly, Naruto was struck by just how lonely he had been at this age. Yes, he'd been a part of a team, but they hadn't been great friends then. He hadn't yet truly made friends with the members of Team 8 or Team 10 yet. Hell, he hadn't even met Team 9. That would have to wait until the Chunin exams. Sighing, he flopped onto his back and stared at the ceiling. The paint was just as chipped and as cracked as he remembered. How many nights had he stared up at it wallowing in self-pity and loneliness? Those years before he had become a ninja, before he'd met all his friends, all his precious people. This is stupid, he muttered. I'm 17, goddammit, not a whiny kid. Pushing himself back up, he picked himself off the bed and made his way towards the door, shoving his sandals on. So he was lonely, so what? He'd made do before, he'd make do now. He was Naruto Uzumaki, goddammit. Future Hokage and savior of Konoha. If he couldn't find something to do, then all hope was lost. It was time to face the world. When he'd told himself he was going to face the world, he didn't quite imagine that meant he'd end up in the shopping district. Nor did he imagine he'd be facing one of the most frustrating decisions of all time. Which outfit to buy? Since losing his jacket, he'd quickly found he wasn't fond of not wearing one. T-shirts were fine and all, but he'd always worn an orange jacket to complete his jumpsuit. It was disheartening to suddenly find himself without it. So he'd made up his mind and settled on buying himself a new one. It wouldn't be like the one pervy sage bought him, as that was still too big for him, but it wouldn't be an exact replica of his old one either, as he was pretty sure no one in Konoha made it anymore. So that brought him to his current predicament: what jacket to buy. Before him were two options. Both were orange, thank God, but he still wasn't sure which one to choose. This would have been so much easier if Sakura or Ino were with him. They were much more knowledgeable about fashion than he was. Finally, he decided on one of the two choices and pulled it down off the rack. It was orange with a dark blue color that was buttoned down at the top, with matching blue cuffs on the sleeve. He'd have to pay extra to get the Uzumaki spiral on the back and on the sleeve, but he'd just completed an A-rank mission, so he had the money. That'll be 5,000 yen, kid, the shopkeeper said. Naruto obligingly handed over the ryo, happy to take the jacket in return. After stuffing Gama-chan back in his pocket, he made his way out of the shop. The whole adventure had taken up a good portion of the afternoon, and now the village was lit up orange with the setting sun. He should probably start heading over to Ikiraku's by now. By the time he arrived, Iruka-sensei had already started on his first bowl. Hey, couldn't even wait for me, he cried, jumping up onto a stool. Iruka-sensei stopped slurping up the noodles and gave him a bashful smile. Sorry, Naruto, the Chunin apologized. I got hungry. Naruto rolled his eyes good-naturedly at the response. Yeah, that's what they all say. Ignoring his jab, Iruka set his chopsticks and down and turned to show he was now focused solely on the genin. So how did your mission go? He asked, getting straight to the point. You were in the mission's office, Naruto frowned. You already heard. Iruka rolled his eyes in a way that said, Lord give me strength. I meant how do you feel it went, he elaborated. An A rank when you're only a genin isn't something to scoff at. Surely it was pretty crazy. Naruto shrugged, pulling out a pair of chopsticks as Toiki set his bowl on ramen down in front of him. It was, he started, trying to think of what to say. Hard. Well, not truthfully. He was a cage-level ninja, a meager A rank was nothing. Scary. Not really. He'd already known what was going to happen, so facing off against a rogue ninja wasn't exactly a nerve-wracking ordeal. Intense, he finally settled on. It was intense, you know. Iruka-sensei made a sound of agreement. And you drained your chakra reserves, the Chunin noted. That really takes a feat for you. What can I say, I'm just that awesome, he smiled in response, rubbing the back of his neck. The two lapsed into a comfortable silence after that, Naruto happily slurping up his ramen while Iruka-sensei did the same, except at a more sedate pace. It wasn't until Naruto was slurping up the miso soup that Iruka-sensei spoke up again. You must be really excited about those chakra chains, huh? Naruto paused and set down his bowl, whipping at his mouth. Huh. Oh yeah, it's awesome, you know. I got my own Kekkei genkai. Now Sasuke's not the only special one around here. Iruka-sensei laughed, eyes crinkling up in response. Yeah, I guess that is true. Yeah, and I wanna learn about him too, you know. So I can use him better, Naruto continued excitedly. But Kakashi-sensei doesn't really know much about him, so I want to ask old man Hokage, but I don't think he knows much either. If he'd even tell him anything. The man seemed dead set against revealing anything about Naruto's parents, and since chakra chains were a staple of Kushina Uzumaki, the likelihood of him spilling anything about them was next to none. It really was a bummer, he thought. Well, I can't help you there, Iruka-sensei said. But the library might have some stuff on them. That's what Sakura said, Naruto agreed. But we're on forced leave for the next 2 days, so I might not get to see her. Just 'cause you're on leave doesn't mean you can't see each other, Iruka-sensei chuckled. Unless you're already that sick of being around one another for a month straight. Nah, I don't think that'll ever be the case, he assured his old sensei. Actually, we have a team meeting after dinner, so I gotta finish up fast, he added. Iruka-sensei just smiled warmly in response. Then you better eat fast, cuz you still have another bowl to go through. Naruto merely laughed before digging in. Just as they'd agreed, the genin of Team 7 met at the memorial stone after sunset. Kakashi-sensei was long gone by now, as they knew he would have come straight here after their debriefing earlier. Silently, they sat in their little semicircle facing each other before starting off the meeting. But instead of starting, they just sat in frigid silence. It was quite uncomfortable. It seemed that Sakura was the one who was willing to step up, because she took a breath and looked over to the Uchiha, ready to say what had been on all of their minds for the past week and a half. Sasuke, Sakura started off, giving the Uchiha a steady look. You almost killed Haku. The boy in question just returned her stare with his own, cold one. Undeterred by the action, Sakura continued. Why? Because, he said in a low tone. He died in the original timeline. Keeping things the same is the smartest course of action, because then we can more accurately predict what's to come. Naruto felt his fists clench where he rested them over his thighs. He hated to admit it, but his argument was sound. Sound, but frustrating. Yeah, but what happens when we go up against Orochimaru, or Itachi? What then? We're not going to go up against Itachi, he ground out, glaring at the blonde. I'm going to save him. Even so, Sakura pressed, cutting in. What happens when you change that? What is the Akatsuki going to do? Sasuke remained stubbornly quiet. Your argument makes sense, but only to a point, she continued. We already agreed we wouldn't let Orochimaru give you the cursed seal. That alone changes things a lot. And you said yourself on the battlefield that you would become Hokage, she added, much to Naruto's chagrin. Well, being Hokage means you protect people, not kill them. I'll become Hokage to reform this village, he spat back. It's corrupt and broken. It's the reason my family is dead. No, Danzo's the reason your family's dead, Naruto cut in harshly. Him and his twisted mindset of how a village should be run. He's who you should be blaming, not Konoha. So let me kill him already, Sasuke shot back. Ever since we got back I knew I had to do it. But we've been running around playing ninja instead. He deserves to die and you know it. So when do I get to kill him? We will kill him, Sakura interjected, voice and expression sympathetic instead of hard. I know you're angry, Sasuke, she continued, trying to cool the situation down. And you have every right to be. But please think about this logically. Danzo is surrounded by root members nearly 24/7. And if he wasn't, we wouldn't know about it because we're only genin, and he's a council member. Getting him alone and killing him would be one of the hardest S-rank missions we've ever gone on, unofficial or not. Do you understand? Naruto watched in silence as Sasuke took in her words. He seemed to be contemplating what she'd said, weighing the pros and cons of her facts. Finally, he appeared to have come to a verdict and looked up to meet her green eyes with his own black ones. Fine, he said, letting Naruto sigh in relief. But I'm still going to kill him eventually. We're going to kill him, Sakura corrected. You're not in this alone. Yeah, you know, Naruto added loudly. And we're gonna save Itachi, too, obviously. A small smile, almost impossible to see, appeared on Sasuke's face at his friend's proclamation. If it wasn't so dark, Naruto might have even seen the Uchiha's face turning a faint pink. For a moment, the old Sasuke was back. The one that would have risked his life for his teammates because he believed it was the right thing to do, not the means to an end. The one who'd somehow managed to find a family in Team 7. Just for a moment, that Sasuke was sitting with them on the training grounds by the memorial stone. Thanks, he managed to say, and meant it. And who knew, they might be seeing that Sasuke a lot more soon enough. Chapter 16. It was 7 in the morning when Naruto awoke to a pounding on his door. The banging was loud and insistent, as if the person on the other side had urgent business to attend to. Although what business anyone needed him for at 7 was a mystery to him. Groggily, he rolled over to glare at the door. It was his day off, and anyone who would bother waking him up this early knew that. The pounding continued. Arg, fine, he growled, pushing the blankets off. Stomping to the door, he swung it open to reveal Sakura with her fist raised, ready to knock again. Upon seeing him, her face lit up. Good, you're awake. Let's go. The pinkett was bubbly with excitement and practically bouncing on her toes. What had her in such a good mood? Go where? He moaned, rubbing at his eyes. I'm not even dressed, Sakura. The library, of course, she stated bemusedly. I told you if Lord Hokage wouldn't talk, we'd find out more about those chains by ourselves. Naruto blinked, surprised by the conviction in her voice. Yeah, but, he started uncertainty. It's our day off, he pointed out. I woulda thought you wouldn't want to see me until at least tomorrow. Sakura seemed to think about his statement before replying. Maybe, she admitted absently. But this is so much more interesting. Like a mystery. Naruto sweet dropped. You're way more excited about this than me. Scoffing, Sakura rolled her eyes and pushed the boy back into his apartment, following after to close the door. Just get dressed. She sighed. We have a long day of going through books and scrolls. She continued as Naruto trudged back into his room. Ah, so exciting. A whole day of research. Only you. He grumbled from his room. Shrugging his shirt on, he prepared himself for a long day ahead of him. Because knowing Sakura, that's exactly what was going to happen. Stacks of books and scrolls were piled high on almost every table in the back corner of the shinobi library. Sakura had really outdone herself. She'd pulled out everything remotely related to Uzushio and the Uzumaki clan, which somehow expanded to books such as genealogical history of the feuding clans as well as a map of the destroyed city itself. Neither was going to be of much use to them, but Sakura insisted on pulling them out anyways. Even so, it was a lot of literature to go through, and Naruto wasn't sure his brain could handle it. A loud thump sounded as Sakura dropped another stack of books onto the table. Looking wearily up from his own book, he saw Sakura dusting her hands off as though she were getting rid of all the grime from the old texts. There, she said. That's all of them. Gulping, Naruto looked over to see just how many books she'd brought. It was a fair-sized stack, about 6 books, on top of the already full tables they'd commandeered already for their research project. I don't think we'll be able to get through all these, Sakura. He moaned. Not by yourselves, no. A new voice cut in. Turning around, both Naruto and Sakura were surprised to find Sasuke standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking thoroughly and utterly bored. Sasuke. Sakura gasped, face turning just the barest hints of pink from a blush. You actually came. Sasuke shrugged nonchalantly, even though they could tell there was the barest amount of discomfort hidden beneath. Yeah, well, the quicker we get through all these, the less I'll have to hear the loser whining. Naruto scoffed, taking offense before realizing that Sasuke was offering his time to help them on something that didn't benefit himself, and quickly shut his mouth. He would be wise not to comment on the fact, as it would just make the Uchiha defensive. Great, he said instead. And with my shadow clones, we'll get through this in time. Sasuke just made his signature, HN, sound before sitting down with him anyways, Sakura following suit right after. Alright guys, she said brightly. Let's get to work. It was nearing lunchtime when Sakura spoke up again. Hey Naruto, she whispered, careful that no one overheard. Naruto looked up to show he was listening. What was your mom's name again? You said she was an Uzumaki. Right, Naruto had never really talked about her since they got back. He hadn't even talked about her to Team 7 at all really. They only knew that his dad was the fourth, leaving everything about his other parent to the imagination except for the fact that she was an Uzumaki. Yeah, he whispered back. Kushina Uzumaki. She had chakra chains too. Sakura hummed in disappointment, looking back down at the book she currently had splayed open before her. Well, damn it, she groaned. This one is about Mito Uzumaki. Mito Uzumaki. That name rang a bell. Oh. Naruto exclaimed, straightening up in his seat. She was the first Hokage's wife, you know, he told them. Then, in a quieter voice, my mom told me she was also the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Pretty cool huh? Has every Jinchuriki in this village been an Uzumaki? Sasuke wondered aloud, still looking down at his own book. Naruto shrugged. Guess my clan's just that awesome, he smirked. Sasuke rolled his eyes and remained silent, not taking the bait. Naruto pouted in disappointment, always enjoying the chance to bicker with his teammate, but all in all wasn't too upset about it. It was enough that the boy was here at all. Best not to push his luck. Hey, this is exciting. Sakura exclaimed, looking back down at the book. It says here she had the 100 hands of healing seal, just like Lady Tsunade. Well yeah, Naruto said. She was her grandmother. Wait, the girl said, straightening up to look at Naruto. Does that mean you're related to Tsunade? Naruto had never really thought of it before, but he supposed she was right. Probably, he said thoughtfully. But like, distantly, too, you know. Lady Mito wasn't my grandma or anything, but I guess we're still technically related. Across from him, Sakura was gushing with excitement. That's so cool, she squealed. You're related to a Sanin. Naruto smiled, Sakura's infectious enthusiasm spreading to him. Still doesn't help us any, though. Sasuke pointed out, bringing the mood back down to somber. Sasuke's right. Sakura sighed dejectedly. If we can't manage to find anything on Kushina Uzumaki or Uzumaki Kekkei Genkai, we won't find anything to help Naruto. Naruto slumped in his seat at the declaration. She was right, which is what made it all the worse. And it's not like we can just ask the old man. He said, in reference to the Hokage. He likes his secrets. He didn't seem all that willing to share yesterday, either. Sasuke pointed out. Our best bet is here in the library. Naruto nodded, still disappointed. And the worst part was, this wasn't even a guarantee. There might be nothing for him here. At least when Sasuke got his Kekkei Genkai the first time around, he had someone to teach him. Naruto had no one. Suddenly the feeling of loneliness he'd been ignoring since they'd arrived came back in its full crushing force, squeezing his lungs and making it difficult to breathe. They all went back to reading after that, Sakura with her book Famous Clansmen Throughout the Ages, Sasuke to his History of Hidden Villages, and Naruto to his own Kekkei Genkai Among Clans. Within minutes they were all completely absorbed in their readings. Man, that was a long day. Naruto groaned as he stretched his back. The library was shutting down for the night and they had all been kicked out, but not before Sakura had checked out nearly every book they hadn't gotten around to reading. She was making Naruto, Sasuke, and Naruto's clones carry them. Naruto was actually loath to dispel them, considering they had gone through a book or two each themselves, and there were about 5 of them. If Naruto was exhausted from just one of him doing this, he wasn't excited to see what happened when he got 5 more of the same experience shoved into his brain. For some reason he had a feeling it would be worse than when he'd been training with Kakashi Sensei the first time around. It sucks we didn't find anything on your Kekkei Genkai, Sakura pouted as they reached her house. Shifting her own stack of books into another arm, she rummaged around for her house key to unlock the door. Turning back around, she added, I'm sorry, Naruto. Nah, it's fine, he said, waving her off. We got loads of time to figure it out. Besides, it's not like I'm gonna use the chains anytime soon. Don't got a reason to. That is true, Sakura agreed. Sasuke hummed in agreement as well. Well, I should get going. My parents really freaked out yesterday about that rank, they don't want me out of the house long. Well, you failed that, Sasuke snarked. For a moment both of the others were shocked into silence. Had Sasuke just made a joke? Staring at the Uchiha, Naruto figured that, yes, he had. Who was he and what had he done to Sasuke Uchiha? Why are you two staring at me? The boy in question demanded. It's creepy. Sorry, Sakura breathed out. It's just, you were funny. Naruto nodded heartily in agreement. Whatever. He tried, face turning just the barest hint of red. Was he blushing? See you two tomorrow. And with that, he handed his own stack of books off to one of Naruto's clones and jumped off to the rooftops to head home. Both Sakura and Naruto watched him go, confusion etched on their faces. So, that happened. Naruto finally offered. Yeah, it did. Chapter 17 Kakashi was seeing ghosts everywhere. The first ghost he'd seen had been in his sensei's son. The boy was a perfect blend of his old sensei and Kushina. He looked just like the fourth Hokage, the blonde hair, the eyes, everything. But he was so much like Kushina too. He had her strong will, her short temper, her love for ramen, and basically everything else that made her an Uzumaki seemed to have passed down to him. He might look like his father, but he was 100% his mother on the inside. What made it all even worse, or better depending on your viewpoint, was that he'd also inherited his desire to become Hokage from both his parents. Sure, Minato Sensei had eventually become Hokage, but that didn't mean Kushina hadn't wanted it just as badly. In fact, Kakashi was sure the only reasons she hadn't gotten the job was because she was both the Kyuubi Jinchuriki and too hot-tempered for it. Being a leader took diplomacy, and that was something she had lacked. After being dismissed by the Hokage, or rather, dismissing himself, he'd gone to the memorial stone for the rest of the day. He hadn't meant to spend that long in front of it, it had just happened. And before he knew it, the sun was setting and his stomach was telling him it was time to eat. This tended to happen a lot after a bad mission. He'd find himself gravitating towards graves and memorials, wishing he could discuss them with his fallen comrades. Sometimes he did, but as always, they never spoke back. As was to be expected from stone slabs. Sometimes he saw things that reminded him of them the days he'd visit their graves. He liked to think to himself that it was them calling out beyond the grave just to say hello or something equally as corny. It could be something as simple as a lily, which was Rin's favorite flower, or a short sword like the one his father used to kill himself with. It didn't matter what it was, in the end, they were wisps of a past he'd long since given up on moving on from. It had been years, but Kakashi was seeing ghosts everywhere. And now he was seeing Obitos. Hey Sensei, Naruto chirped when the Jonin finally decided to show up at the training ground. It looked like the three had already started running drills, knowing he'd be late and deciding to take advantage of the time instead of just wasting it doing nothing. Looking at the boy though, he was shocked when he finally saw what he was wearing. It was Obito's jacket. Sure, the colors were inverted, but it was the same design, same length, same everything. Kakashi was sure that if Naruto turned around he'd see the Uzumaki spiral on the back as opposed to the Uchiha fan, but it was inconsequential. He blinked once. And again. Of course he should have figured the boy would buy a new jacket, seeing as the other one was destroyed. But geez, what were the chances? Sensei, you okay? The voice shook him out of his reverie and he found himself looking down at Sakura, giving him a careful, steady look. Oh, yes. Never better, he lied, crinkling his eye into one of his iconic smiles. He hoped it didn't look too forced. Okay, she trailed off, unconvinced. Naruto and Sasuke shared a look between them that suggested they felt the same way. Kakashi narrowed his eyes at the three of them. Since when were genin so good at reading emotions? Shrugging, he brushed off the thought of the stupid jacket and forced himself not to dwell on it. Anyways, I'd like to start off today by first congratulating all of you on completing your first A-rank mission. Not a small feat for any genin to manage, let alone those fresh out of the academy, he said warmly. So good job, you three. His words were met with bright smiles and twinkling eyes. But now that you've proven you can hold yourselves in a real battle, your training will be that much harder. The indigent squawks that followed were music to his ears. Lunch break was spent at Ikiraku's, at Naruto's behest. All three of his genin ordered at least 2 bowls, making up for the massive amount of calories they had burned that morning. Kakashi had pushed them hard, even by his standards but perhaps not by Jia's, and he felt maybe they deserved a little something as a reward, which is why he was treating them to lunch. All of them had already finished 1 bowl and were working on their second, or third in Naruto's case. Even Sakura, who didn't seem the least bit concerned with watching her figure, as the psych report had stated before he'd met them. In fact, the girl was nothing like the report claimed. She wasn't shy or timid, uncertain of her abilities. Instead, she was headstrong and confident, oftentimes taking on a leader position amongst the group. It was interesting. Hey Sensei, Naruto piped up from his left. Kakashi turned to give him his attention with his one good eye. Do ya think we could maybe try out my chakra chains soon? You said I could once we're back in the village, and we are, so, the boy trailed off. His connotation was clear. He wanted to figure out how to use his dangerous and powerful Kekkei genkai. But he still needed permission, which was cute. By still, the fact remained that Kakashi was sorely unequipped to deal with something like this. Sharingan. No problem. Chakra chains. No chance. But Naruto was right. He had promised him, sort of, that he could practice them once back in Konoha. It wouldn't be right to deny him if that. After our drills, sure, he said lightly, answering Naruto's question. A blinding smile lit up his face before he dug back into his third bowl of ramen. Kakashi suppressed the urge to roll his eye at the boy's enthusiasm. That boy loved ramen more than his mother did, if that was even possible. Did you find anything in those books yesterday, Naruto? Toiki suddenly said from behind the counter. Raising an eyebrow, Kakashi looked from the ramen chef back to Naruto in confusion. Naruto, and books. In the same sentence. Nah, nothing yet, Naruto answered, slightly downcast. But we still got lots of them to go through. I'm sure one of them has something useful. What is this about books? Kakashi finally asked. It was Sakura who answered though. Oh, yesterday we all went to the library to help Naruto find anything about his Kekkei genkai and clan. We didn't really find much that was helpful, though. That's right, Ayame said, cutting in. They came here for lunch with their hands full of books and scrolls. I don't think I've ever seen little Naruto so silent for so long, she gushed. Hey, Naruto exclaimed. I'm not little. You are to me, she smiled sweetly. I'm only 5 years younger than you, he argued, as if it wasn't practically half his lifespan. Ayame shrugged casually, dismissing it. Meanwhile, while they bickered back and forth, Kakashi was staring at his student. He remembered reading his file and learning that he was horrible in class and at studying. Now here he was reading books in his free time. Of course he remembered his students promising that they would find something on the Uzumaki clan if no one else would tell them, but it still surprised him. It seemed everyone here was determined to prove him wrong on his assumptions. What was next? Sasuke wanted to settle down and have a family. At this point he wouldn't be surprised. Naruto, he said. If you keep talking you won't be able to finish your ramen, he reminded him. Naruto perked up at his words. You're right, he cried, before digging in again. Kakashi eyes smiled at his enthusiasm. On his right, Sakura rolled her eyes while Sasuke huffed. All in all, normal Team 7 behavior. Maybe he had nothing to worry about after all. Training Ground 7 was full of loose soil and kunai by the time they were finished with Kakashi-sensei's drills. True to his word, he had pushed them harder than ever before, which meant more intense training and not as many breaks. It had been 3 hours since lunch, and all them were exhausted. They'd been sparring for the past hour, and before that running evasion drills like they had been before the wave mission. It was also target practice because it was the genin who were attacking the poor trainee instead of Kakashi-sensei like it normally would have been. All of them came away with a few scratches, even if it was just from hitting the ground too hard. Sakura came away the most clean out of all of them thanks to her training as a field medic, since field medics had to be great at evasion so as to stay alive to help their teammates. She probably would have gotten off totally free of any scrapes, but they still had covers to maintain, and being perfect at evasion would have raised a few eyebrows. Alright, break time, their sadistic sensei finally announced cheerily from the side. All three flopped heavily onto the ground, young bodies not used to the exertion they were putting them through. Hey sensei, Naruto breathed from where he lay on the ground. You said after drills I could work on my chakra chains. Can we do that now? Kakashi sensei seemed to consider this for a moment before answering. Not when you're gasping for breath, no, was his level response. Give it a few minutes. Sakura could have sworn she heard the word, dick, escape Naruto's mouth, but it was so quiet she couldn't be sure. Sure enough, once all their breaths had evened out, Kakashi-sensei grudgingly let him up to practice while Sasuke and Sakura stayed on the sidelines and ran through basic, non-demanding drills. Alright, whenever you're ready, their sensei called out. Naruto got ready and into horse stance before Sakura shouted out, wait. Your jacket. Right, his shirt and jacket which he didn't want destroyed like his old ones had been. Right, he called back. Unbuttoning his jacket, he tossed it to the side before slipping his shirt off and doing the same. Now he was standing bare-chested in the clearing all by himself, his team all standing off the side warily watching him. Well, here's go nothing. With a deep look of concentration, Naruto focused his chakra and tried to recall the feeling of accessing his Kekkei genkai. He remembered it hurting, and the feeling of numbness sweeping through his body as well. But as much as he tried to recreate it, nothing happened. After a while he gave up on that and went for a different tactic, just building up chakra and releasing it at different intervals in hopes that would spark something. No such luck. How had he done this the first time? Aren't you gonna start? Sasuke asked, voice breaking the intense silence. I am, Naruto growled, eyes squeezed shut in concentration. Well, you've been trying for 30 minutes now, his friend stated dully. It just looks like you need to take a shit. Sasuke, Kakashi-sensei's warning tone sounded next to him. The boy merely shrugged in response. Finally Naruto gave up and released his pose, standing up straight and glaring at the ground. His teammates seemed to sense his frustration, and he felt Sakura looking at him with some form of pity while Sasuke's eyes were fixed on him like he was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Neither were well received. Well, Kakashi-sensei spoke up. That was anticlimactic. The tone was one of his usual lazy ones, but the words stung nonetheless, even if they weren't meant to. Naruto turned to glare at his sensei. It's not exactly like there's a guild book telling me how to do it, he spat out, both embarrassed by his shortcomings as well as frustrated. No, his sensei sighed sympathetically. There isn't. Naruto's shoulders slumped, and he resigned himself to putting his shirt and jacket back on. He didn't think he would be getting this down today. Kakashi-sensei seemed to realize this because he turned to Sasuke and Sakura and dismissed them for the day as well. The two genin nodded and packed up their stuff, heading off back to their homes waving their farewells to their teammate. But instead of following the two out like he expected, Naruto noticed Kakashi-sensei had stayed behind. Before Naruto could ask any questions, the jonin spoke up. You don't know how to access it, he stated. Naruto only nodded stiffly in response. He was met with a cool, leveling look by his sensei before the man broke the silence again. "Walk with me," was all he said, before turning around and heading away. Naruto could only scrunch his brow in confusion before following. Whatever his eccentric sensei had to say, he didn't doubt it'd be interesting. They stopped in front of a headstone in Konoha's graveyard. It was a headstone that looked just like all the other headstones. A name carved into pale granite set into the ground. Nothing assuming about it, except for the name. "This grave belongs to the last Uzumaki to use chakra chains in this village," Kakashi sensei told him, staring down at the headstone marked Kushina Uzumaki. Naruto had known that. What he hadn't known was where her grave actually lay. Now he did. She died the night of the Kyuubi attack. In fact, it was with her help that the fourth even managed to seal the beast and save the village, he continued, oblivious to Naruto's internal storm of emotions. "I know that," he thought to himself. "I know every single bit of it. But why are you telling me this now? Her gift made her a strong shinobi. One of the best in our village. But she used it to defend and protect her precious people. Just like you did back on the bridge." He paused, still looking down at the grave. "I can't tell you how to access a Kekkei genkai. I can tell you of my own experiences with the Sharingan, but I feel the two are far too different for it to count towards much." Naruto nodded next to him. "But I have a feeling that however you did it then, that was how she did it. It's not a conscious thought, but a feeling. A feeling to protect. Or attack. Whichever is your aim." Naruto blinked, surprised by the tears that had been gathering in his eyes as he stared down at his mother's grave. "I can't tell you how to use your gift. And neither can she. But I'm sure if you give yourself enough time instead of getting mad, you'll figure it out." And with that, he gave one last parting glance to the headstone and turned around, patting his pupil on the shoulder before heading for the exit. Naruto didn't know what to make of his sensei's words, but he felt they were important. They weren't exactly inspiring, per se, but they were something. "Thanks, sensei," he mumbled, knowing full well he was long out of earshot. Then, even quieter, he added, "Hey mom. Chapter 18. The Chunin exams were coming up. That was a fact. They were just over a month away, starting at the beginning of July and ending mid-August, and it was the end of May now. May 26th to be exact. 2 weeks since the disastrous attempt at summoning his Kekkei genkai. 2 weeks since he'd discovered where his mom's grave lay, and 2 weeks of non-stop reading in the vain hope of finding something about his clan that could help him understand his gift and heritage better. And so far, nothing. It was starting to get very annoying. This is useless," he moaned, dropping his head onto the table. Across from him, Sakura made a face of disdain at his antics. "Naruto," she sighed. "We haven't even gone through all the books yet." "Yeah, but we almost have," he noted, glaring at the swindling pile. They'd gone through 2/3 of the books in the past 2 weeks, slowed down thanks to their sensei's rigorous training. But still, it was enough to lose hope of ever finding anything of value. It was one of their rare days off that they were sat around doing all this reading. Kakashi sensei only allowed them one rest day for every 6, so as to recuperate and take care of any other business they might need, like shopping and laundry. Or in their case, studying. And right now they were all cooped up in Sasuke's apartment, huddled around his kitchen table with all the remaining books spread around them. Leftover dishes from lunch were also scattered around the table, chopsticks resting haphazardly in bowls of unfinished yakisoba. Overall, it was quite a messy scene, and one they were quickly growing familiar with. "Well, you can't give up hope yet," Sakura said assuredly, focusing back on her book. "You never have before." That was true, Naruto admitted grudgingly. But then again, that usually only applies to jutsu someone could actually tell him about. Like the Rasengan or shadow clones. Not something that might as well be extinct. Except for that girl Karen, as Sasuke had informed them earlier. But she hadn't discovered it yet either, so it didn't really count. "Hey Sasuke," Naruto asked, a sudden thought having come to him. "HN," the Uchiha asked, still absorbed in his own readings. Naruto took that as confirmation for him to go on. "How do you access your Sharingan? Is there like a trick to it?" His reason for asking being that maybe Kekkei genkai are alike in their usage, and that knowing how Sasuke used his would Naruto know how his own worked. "It's not a trick," the boy sighed. "It's more like flexing your finger. Something you can just do." "Yeah but," Naruto tried. "I don't know how to flex my finger in this scenario, you know." "Then, how'd you do it the first time?" Sasuke shrugged, setting his book down. "Same as yours. It just happened. Then after that, I just knew how it worked, so it was easy." But I was raised around, taught how it worked before I even developed it. It's different for you. You've never really experienced it before. Sighing, Naruto folded his arms on the table and dejectedly rested his chin on them. I suppose you're right, he mumbled. Next to him, Sakura was looking at him with pitying green eyes, a slight frown painting her lips. Are you sure there's no one you can ask? Not even the Kyuubi. Naruto perked up at that, confusion flitting across his face. You mean Kurama? He asked. Yeah, Sakura nodded. You said he lived in your mother practically her whole life. Surely he at least knew about her Kekkei genkai, if not experienced it. Naruto blinked, taken aback. How could he be so stupid? Of course Kurama would know about them. He'd seen them used on the fox before, and remembered how his mom had told him about how she'd kept him at bay while his mother sealed him away again with the same chains. I take it by your dopey expression that would be a yes, Sasuke drawled across him from him. Naruto pouted in response, but didn't argue. Just talk to him, Sakura suggested. It can't hurt to ask. Well, technically it could, but he wasn't going to correct her on that. Okay, fine, he mumbled, already drawing himself up into a meditative position. Hopefully he's in a good mood. The sewer of his mind was just as wet and stinky as it always was when he appeared. He was standing ankle deep in the stuff, feet squelching uncomfortably in his sandals. Even though he knew it wasn't real, it still felt the real thing. And the real thing was disgusting. It's about damn time, Kurama grumbled from behind the bars. The gate loomed in front of Naruto, just like it always had. Golden bars stretching up into the darkness, the lock still firmly in place. The fox's ears were flattened back in an either bored or tired gesture, eyes red slits in the dark. He didn't appear entirely happy with his predicament. Not surprising though, seeing as he had just been allowed out and about before being slingshot back in time into his old cage. It also meant Naruto couldn't use Kyuubi mode either, so it really sucked for both of them. Probably more for Kurama though. Sorry Kurama, he said sincerely. Things have been crazy. I know, the fox growled out. Then, looking down at him knowingly, said, it's not every day you unlock a Kekkei genkai. Naruto gaped, jaw dropping open. You knew, he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at the tailed beast. Kurama merely scoffed in response. Of course I knew, brat. I live inside you. I see everything you do. Then, in a lower voice, although I could have gone without the reminder. The reminder of being bound by the same chains, no doubt. Well, actually, that's why I'm here, Naruto chirped, brightening up instantly. I was wondering if you knew anything about it. You know, to help me get a hang of it. 'Cause there aren't any other Uzumaki around and you were in my mom, so you must have experience with it, right? Kurama's ears flattened even further during his excited rambling, showing just how much the fox was dreading such a task. Why don't you ask that annoying sensei of yours? He sighed defeatedly. And leave me out of it. You already know why, Naruto accused, calling him out on his bullshit. If Kurama did indeed see everything he did, then he knew damn well why that wouldn't work. The fox sighed regardless. At least I tried. Rolling his eyes, Naruto strut up to the bars of the cage and slipped through them, clamber onto the fox's arm so as to be more level with his eyes. Come on Kurama, he tried, looking up at him earnestly. You know how boring all this reading is. If you tell me about those chains, it'll be over. Because threatening a creature of mischief and trickery with even more dull reading was exactly how one should coerce information from it. Luckily for him, it seemed to do the trick, and Kurama's eye slid over to meet his and the demon let out a great huff of resignation. Beaming in success, Naruto jumped back and stood at attention, ready to listen. First of all, Kurama started, voice drawn as if reluctant. Which he most definitely was. Kekkei genkai aren't like normal jutsu. There's no hand sign or method for it. It's a feeling. Frowning in confusion, Naruto cocked his head to the side. Like, how do you mean? The fox sighed in exasperation, drawing a tired hand down his muzzle. I mean it's not something you consciously focus on or do. Like that Uchiha brat said, it's like lifting a finger. You just do. Yeah but I don't even know how to do that. He shot back in frustration. Alright then, how'd you do it the first time? Kurama asked rhetorically. Growling angrily at the fox's unhelpfulness, he cried, I don't know, I just did. Naruto stopped in his tracks. Wait, he said. The sight of Kurama grinning smugly down at him wasn't entirely a welcome one. Like I said, brat, the fox smirked. You just do. Just do. Don't think. That was the secret. Now, the fox continued, shifting himself into a different position. Leave me alone so I can sleep. God knows I need it after your incessant yammering. What? Hey, I thought we were friend. Naruto shot back, backtracking out of the cage. An annoyed swish of one of Kurama's tails was the only response he got before he was shot back into the real world. When he blinked open his eyes, it was to the sight of Sakura's curious green ones, and Sasuke's empty black ones. Well, Sakura immediately asked, leaning forward over the table. Did he help at all? Kinda, he admitted. I mean, we'll see tomorrow, I guess. Tomorrow when they were back to training with their insane sensei. Shortly after, the two non-Uchiha packed up their stuff and prepared to leave, waving their teammate off at the door. Once they reached the road, Naruto started off in the opposite direction of Sakura. Naruto, where are you going? She asked with a frown, noticing him walking away from her. Your house is that way, she said, pointing down the road she had already started to head down herself. I know, Naruto replied. I just have to do something first. Sakura frowned, but didn't press further, to which he was grateful. Instead, she nodded and waved him off with a smile. See you tomorrow then, she smiled, heading down the road. See ya. He waved back, waiting until she was out of sight before heading off to his own destination. He just hoped he'd have enough money for it. Naruto couldn't say he'd ever been inside Yamanaka's flower shop before. At least not for any business reason. So he had no idea what to expect when he walked into the small shop with Gama-chan tucked away in his pocket, ready to be used. He was greeted immediately by a familiar voice. Naruto, what are you doing here? Ino sneered, looking up from her magazine. Well, it wasn't exactly a sneer, but it wasn't entirely polite either. Good afternoon to you, too, he muttered, shoulders slumping in resignation. Ino, noticing how bitchy she'd been, blinked and straightened up, assuming a more professional manner. Sorry, she said. It's just, you've never been in here before, and I can't help think you're gonna use my flowers for some prank, she explained. Then, narrowing her eyes, added. You not pulling a prank, are you? Naruto blinked, taken aback. What? No, he frowned. He hadn't pulled a prank in years. Well, years for him. Months to everyone else. But still, Ino hadn't seen him since team assignment day, so she didn't know how much he'd changed. No, he continued. I'm here for some, he pulled out the note in his pocket he'd jotted down at the library. Carnations, he read off. Immediately Ino's brow furrowed in confusion. Carnations. Those are used for gravestones, she noted. Naruto just nodded. I know. He'd wanted to bring flowers to his mom's grave for a while now, but hadn't known what kind to get. Finally he had found a book on it at the library when he'd gone to return some of the ones he'd checked out and had jotted it down for this exact reason. Immediately Ino's face softened in sympathy, and the suspicion she'd been holding onto drained away. Oh, she said, voice softer than before. Alright, well, which color would you like? She made her way around to counter to get the flowers he'd asked for. What do you suggest? He asked, completely at a loss. Ino just smiled softly and showed him his choices. Each flower has its meaning, she told him, bending down to point out the carnations. Pink stands for remembrance, so if you wanted to express how much you missed them, or were thinking about them, you'd choose that. If you wanted to express love and passion, you would choose red. She gestured to the flower. And white is for love and innocence. Naruto nodded along with what she said, eyes focused on the flowers. I think I'll go with pink, you know. Ino nodded, going to clip a small bouquet. May I ask the occasion? It's alright if you don't want to say. Naruto just shrugged in reply, unsure what to say. It's kinda complicated, he admitted awkwardly. I guess, one of my heroes deserves to be remembered, you know. Because there were a lot of forgotten heroes in Konoha's history. It wouldn't be a far stretch of the imagination for Naruto to want to celebrate one of them. Maybe. Ino nodded in understanding. I'll just go and ring you up then, she said, heading back to the counter to wrap the bouquet up. I hope whoever you're going to see appreciated these. Naruto smiled. She will. The graveyard was empty when Naruto entered, grounds bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. It cast a serene atmosphere across it, washing away the sadness of death that would usually go with a scene like this. Perfect for what he was planning. Hey mom, he said, plopping down in front of the grave. Since he'd discovered where she was buried, he'd meant to come back and visit, but had been too busy to do so. He'd never paid his proper respects to his parents since finding out who they were, so now he decided he would. He'd stopped by Ikiraku's on his way over, grabbing 2 to-go cups of his favorite ramen. One for him, one for her. He knew it was kind of a waste of perfectly good ramen, but it was the thought that counted. Setting one of the to-go cups on top of the headstone, he placed the chopsticks on the lid and followed it quickly by setting the flowers down next to it. I didn't know if you liked ramen, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. But I thought you might, 'cause I do. And I know we're a lot alike, so, he trailed off, unsure how to continue. It was the first time he'd ever visited his mom's grave on his own before. Thanks to Kakashi Sensei's crazy schedule, he hadn't had the time or energy to devote to stopping by. That wasn't saying he hadn't meant to for the past 2 weeks, he completely had. But most days he came home too tired to even make dinner, let alone trek all the way out to Konoha's graveyard. But finally today he had found time. And amazingly he had money to spare still left over from the wave mission. He'd spent most of it on groceries and rent already, but he'd made sure to put some aside for this occasion. He was glad he had. Anyway, he started again, fidgeting with his own chopsticks. I haven't spoken to you in a while, which I think makes me a bad son, I don't really know. But I have a lot to tell you. He started digging into his ramen while he spoke, waving his chopsticks around animatedly as he recalled his adventure to wave and everything he's learned so far. Talking about anything and everything that came to his mind, just because he felt he should share it with her. So anyways, he continued excitedly. I haven't told you this yet, but I got your Kekkei genkai. How cool is that, you know? I know you and some other Uzumaki had it, but I never figured I'd get it. Although I still don't know how to use it. Kurama gave me some good tips, but I haven't tried them yet. Maybe tomorrow, he mused thoughtfully. I'd tell Dad, too, but he's kinda buried with the other Hokage, and it'd be weird if someone saw me talking to him about all this stuff, you know. 'Cause no one knows he's my dad or anything. I mean, I can still talk to you, 'cause we're both Uzumaki, so it's not weird. But Dad's, he's the fourth, you know. And he sighed. I'm just Naruto. That's not true. The sudden voice shocked Naruto as he hadn't heard anyone approach, and he whirled around to confront his stalker. He was ready to deny anything they'd just heard, say he was just joking, or pulling a prank. Anything to deny that what he'd said technically broke an S-class secret. But when he saw who it was, he realized he didn't have to. Sasuke. And indeed, it was the Uchiha himself who was standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, scowl permanently cemented on his face in a show of perpetual disdain. How did he know he was here? How long had he been standing there? Had he followed him all the way from his house? You're not, he said flatly. Naruto frowned, blinking. Not what? Sighing despairingly, Sasuke asked, you're really gonna make me say it? When Naruto only continued to give him a puzzled look, Sasuke rolled his eyes and squatted down to his height, hands now folded across his knees. You're not just Naruto, he ground out, eyes looking anywhere but at his teammate. You're a good ninja. See, there, I admitted it. And, he ground his teeth in frustration, eyes closed in a moment of acceptance before he spoke again. And you're a good friend. Naruto could only blink in shock as the admission sunk in. Sasuke recognized him, not as a person, but as a friend. As a good shinobi. That was all he'd ever wanted from him. He didn't even know how to respond, instead just staring at him with his mouth hanging open. Close your mouth, you moron, Sasuke finally snapped, uncomfortable with the amount of emotions being exhibited. You look like a damn fish. Sorry, he said, immediately snapping it shut. Sasuke merely rolled his eyes and shifted into a sitting position. He resumed his usual silence, focusing intently on the grass at his feet. It didn't look like he was about to say anything anytime soon. Thanks, Naruto finally breathed, just the barest smile crossing his face. Means a lot. HN. They continued to sit in silence for a good few minutes longer before Naruto broke it. Hey, how'd you know I was here? Sasuke shrugged. I saw you going the other way when you left my house, he admitted casually. Wondered what was up. Were you standing behind me that whole time? He asked, cringing at the thought. Thankfully, the boy scoffed in response. No, only for the last part, he replied. Then, is that ramen still hot? He asked, eyeing Kushina's cup. Naruto shrugged. You can have it, he shrugged. I was planning to finish it off for her, he admitted, gesturing to his mom's grave. But yeah, go ahead. Sasuke nodded, taking the cup and chopsticks in hand. It's cold, he stated. You can breathe fire, Sasuke, Naruto deadpanned. I'm sure you can figure something out. Chapter 19 Kakashi really should have realized something was up with his genin team when they claimed to know how to tree walk and water walk without him having to teach them. It probably wasn't the standard for most 12-year-olds, but he wouldn't know those things, as he made Chunin his age 6. He also should have been more suspicious when they seemed to all have some mastery over their elemental affinity. But, again, he had no reference for how normal genin progressed because of his odd upbringing. So it was quite a shock to him when he agreed to sit down for dango and tea with his other Jonin instructors and heard them talking about their own students' progress. First of all, he hadn't expected to take up the offer Kurenai and Asuma offered him, as he never had before. But for some reason he did. Perhaps it was because of his students' effect on him. Ever since taking them on, he'd gone out more and read less. Well, that wasn't to say he actually read less, he just didn't do it in public as much. And he'd only been going out because they dragged him along to places like Ikiraku's for lunch. He always seemed to end up paying though, so he wasn't too thrilled about that. But he digressed. The point was, he had taken his friends up on the offer and was now sitting down in Anko's favorite dango shop, enjoying some sweets and tea. He'd never really been a fan of sweets though, so he was letting Asuma eat his while he stuck with tea. So Kakashi, Kurenai started, setting her cup down. How has teaching been? This is the first time you've ever taken on a team before. He offered a shrug in response, not really sure what to say. You know, he offered half-heartedly. They're genin. Kurenai chuckled softly, taking a bite of her dango. That is true, she managed to say around a mouthful of sweets. For reason this made Asuma laugh. Glancing over at him, Kakashi saw the same sappy look in his eyes that Obito always had when looking at Rin. Oh god, he had it bad for Kurenai. Great, even more drama for him to be involved in. Just what he needed. So what have you been up to? Asuma asked, lighting a cigarette he had clamped between his teeth. I heard you've been pushing them rather hard with those D ranks. That was last month, he said. Ever since we got back from Wave it's been nothing but training. Oh yeah, I heard about that, Kurenai said. C rank turned to rank. I'm sure that must have been scary for them. Kakashi shrugged. Honestly, they handled it just fine. A little too fine, he thought to himself. Then, aloud, added, but still, I want them to be prepared if something like that ever happens again. He didn't need to see his students covered in Senbon ever again, or keeling over from chakra exhaustion. He'd already lost enough teammates, thank you. Right, Asuma said. Just don't push them too hard. They are still kids after all. Kakashi rolled his eyes at the reminder. Kids, his ass. They were demons. Demons who wanted nothing more than to make his life a living hell. Don't worry, I only train them 6 days out of 7. They still have a day to rest. Apparently, this was not the right thing to say. Are you crazy? Kurenai exclaimed, slamming her tea on the table. Both Kakashi and Asuma jumped back in surprise, eyeing the kunoichi wearily. 6 days. That's way too much. They need a day off at least every 3 days. 4 if you stretch it. You're going to burn them out on 6. Kakashi blinked, taken aback by her sudden outburst. Even Asuma looked a little scared. But the traitor still sided with her, turning to give Kakashi an exasperated look. I agree with Kurenai on this, he said with a sigh. I'm all for pushing your students, but that is a little much. Kakashi tried to shrug it off, not sure what to say. They never complain, he offered weakly. Because you're their sensei, Kurenai pointed out dryly. It would be rude of them to do so. Because they're the peak of politeness and good behavior, he thought sarcastically. Maybe she was coming on to him like this because she didn't know how evil they were. Yes, that must be it. After all, she had a quiet, reserved Aburame, and a shy Hyuga. The only thing she had to worry about was that Inuzuka who had a mouth loud enough to rival Naruto's. His students were waking nightmares. She had no idea what he was dealing with. Ma, alright, he sighed, raising his hands in a show of surrender. He knew he couldn't explain himself to her. She was too stubborn. Anyways, Asuma started carefully, eager to change the subject. How far has your team gotten, Kurenai? I think you mentioned something about genjutsu last time. Shifting her red eyes from Kakashi, Kurenai's face softened and she replied to the Jonin. Yes I did. And my team has been making great progress in it. Although I've been running team drills with them for the past week. It was already good, but it can always be improved. I just started my team on water walking, Asuma offered, taking a drag of his cigarette. They already mastered tree walking the other week. I'm sure they'll get this one down in no time. Next to him, Kakashi choked on his drink. Both Kurenai and Asuma looked at him strangely. He coughed for a bit before speaking. What do you mean the other week? He finally managed, staring at Asuma. The other Jonin just gave him a confused look, brow pulled tight together. Yeah, I hadn't gotten around to it until recently. Too busy working on their taijutsu and missions, he frowned, assuming Kakashi was judging his teaching skills. No, that's what I'm saying, the ex-Anbu managed, still slightly shocked. I mean, I thought they already knew that stuff. Across the table, Kurenai scoffed. They're taught basic chakra control in the academy, but that's it. Everything else is left up to us. Then, you wouldn't have known that, of course, she added in a softer voice. Graduating as early as you did. Kakashi shifted uncomfortably where he sat, eager to move the conversation along. This was why he didn't socialize much. Wait, Asuma cut in. Do your students already know that stuff? Kakashi nodded. And water walking. Claimed they already knew how to do it a few weeks into teaching them. Kurenai gawked before pulling herself together, lips then turning down into a frown. That's odd, she said. I wonder how they could have learned that. He had no response for that. Honestly, Kakashi had never really given it much thought before. But pairing his friends' reactions with the fact that they already seemed to have mastered their elemental affinities, it was quite strange. Perhaps he should have looked into it more when the problem had first arisen, but he hadn't. They had been a little busy at the time after all. So instead of replying, he just shrugged. It was definitely something to looking into later, though. Accepting that they probably wouldn't get anything more out of him, the other two went back to bragging about their students and all that they've done. Kakashi decided to stay out of it for the most part. There wasn't really anything for him to add that he thought was noteworthy that they didn't already know. Things like Naruto's chains and Sasuke's Sharingan were already old news to the village. No point commenting on it now, even if he was proud of them, not that he'd ever admit it. They were monsters, and that was that. Puberty. A natural part of child development. Completely normal. After all, it was just the change of hormone production in the body triggering certain organs and bones to grow and develop more. Oil production in the skin increased, causing acne and other skin blemishes. Hair started to appear all over the body, in the armpits and nether regions respectively, as well as altering the chemicals in the brain to cause things like mood swing and irrational and stupid thinking. At least, that was the medical standpoint Sakura had adopted on it. Experiencing it though was a different matter. When she was 17, she had already gotten through the worst of it. No more growing pains in her legs or breasts, no more irregular periods, no more crazy mood swings. No more annoying shit. But now, as a 12-year-old, she got to go through it all again. And the worst part was her first period. It wasn't so bad the second time around, but boy were the cramps horrible. After she'd left Sasuke's, they'd come on tenfold. As soon as she'd gotten home, she'd made a beeline for the bathroom and stole one of her mom's tampons before rushing off to her room. She'd been stuck there ever since, curled pathetically on her bed in a fetal position. Her parents had called her out for dinner, but she declined, saying she wasn't feeling good. Shit, she still had to tell her mom it was her first period. Just the thought of it sent a shudder down her spine. Oh God, she did not want to relive the talk again. It was bad enough the first time around, hearing it a second time would literally kill her. At least she knew what to expect, so that was a plus. She knew from experience that her cramps would start to peter out after a year and a half, lessening in intensity. That might change of course because her exercise routine were so much different now than they were when she was actually 12. She was eating more than she had before, and better food at that, of course. She usually had ikirakus at least once a week, but that was Naruto's fault, so that alone was setting her up for an easier time through puberty. But still, it was puberty. And it fucking sucked. And all guys have to deal with is voice drops and awkward boners, she thought bitterly as she curled tighter into herself. Fuck them. Chapter 20. For once in their genin career, Sakura was late to their morning meeting. Naruto and Sasuke had already convened at the usual meeting spot on the bridge, ready to wait a while for their teacher, but were surprised when there was no pink hair to greet them. About an hour later she showed up, hair in disarray, clutching at her stomach, bags under her eyes, and a storm cloud hanging over her head. She looked like shit. You okay, Sakura? Naruto asked warily, eyeing her grouchy face with growing unease. An angry Sakura was never a pleasant Sakura. I'm fine, she bit out, not sounded fine in the least. Naruto wisely decided not to mention the observation, as he wanted to keep all his teeth in his mouth. Thank you very much. It was another few minutes before their sensei decided to show up, trusty book in hand as usual. Immediately, Naruto perked up and bounced over to him. Hey sensei, what are we gonna learn today? Naruto asked, excited to try the trick Kurama had told him. Well, it wasn't really a trick, but he wanted to try it nonetheless. But he needed downtime to do it, and whether or not they had downtime depended on what their sensei was going to teach them. Well, reteach them. Naruto, don't get so excited. We won't be doing any of that today. Not if he wanted a kunai up his ass, anyway. Courtesy of Kurenai. What? No training. No training, he echoed, voice chipper. Then, clapping his hands together and rubbing them as if excited, added, instead, we'll be doing missions. Oh, so like another escort mission? Sakura asked. Maybe taking out some bandits. Oh no, nothing like that, Kakashi-sensei waved off. There's a festival about to start a few towns over, and we've been hired to help set up one for one of the merchants attending. Apparently he has a few cartfuls of wares and needed a few extra hands. Immediately the atmosphere changed from hopeful and excited to disparaged into the blink of an eye. AD rank, Naruto deadpanned, eye twitching. Really? Next to him, Sasuke looked about ready to summon his Mangekyo, and Sakura her fists. Kakashi-sensei seemed to notice this and raised a wary eyebrow. You three are still genin, after all, he pointed out. Besides, I thought you might appreciate a slow-paced mission after the last one we did. Yeah, but Wave was exciting. Naruto groaned, falling into his old childish habit of whining. Well, whining more than usual. We saved a town, learned some new jutsu, did some cool shit. An elbow in his ribs for swearing. And came out completely fine. I don't see why we can't do another C rank. An actual C rank, anyways. I wouldn't say you were completely fine, Kakashi-sensei noted, a weary look in his eye. Two of you were unconscious by the end of that fight, and one nearly dead. A sharp look towards Naruto as he said the last bit. Think of this as an easy, get back on our feet type mission. The three, genin, understood that they weren't going to get anywhere arguing with the man, and just accepted their fate, however grudgingly. They couldn't say they had expected to get more C ranks after Wave, as it hadn't happened last time. But they'd done a far better job this time around, so it wasn't too far-fetched to hope for something better. They should have known better to hope with the sensei they had. So, grudgingly, the three all went back to their homes to pack for their journey, cursing their sensei all the way. Honestly, the reason for why he'd picked up AD rank wasn't just to give his students a break, although Kurenai had been right on that part. It had also been so that he could observe them. Now, Kakashi couldn't claim to know much about child development, but after spending the rest of yesterday observing some of the other teams unbeknownst to them, he'd come to the conclusion that maybe his genin were a little more mature than their comrades. Maybe. And maybe he'd also picked up a book on child development just to see what a normal child was supposed to be like in their adolescence. Not that anyone would ever know. He'd made sure to use a henge when borrowing it from the library. He was currently reading said book in the guise of Ika Ika as they walked down the dusty road away from the village. All three of his students walked in front of him in a loose diamond formation, seeming to all the world idle, slightly bored teens. But Kakashi knew better. He could see the slight tension in their muscles, the kind that only seasoned shinobi had, like him. He could see their eyes flicking to and fro every few minutes, as if scanning the area for threats. Humming in intrigue, he consulted the book for answers. As your child enters puberty, the book read, they will start to go through changes both physically and mentally. Such changes can be concerns over body image, looks, and clothing. Glancing up, Kakashi noted how none of them had exhibited behavior like that over the past few months he'd known them. Well, maybe the clothing thing for Naruto, but that was for a different reason. Sighing, he looked back down at the book and continued to read. Other changes might involve them focusing on themselves more, going back and forth between high expectations and lack of confidence. Nope. His kids were all pretty confident in themselves. They will experience mood swings and heightened emotions. This is due to the hormones in their body, and nothing against you as a parent. These emotions, as wild as they may be, are normal in childhood development due to hormones coursing through their bodies. Moodiness. Nope. That wasn't to say, of course, that they didn't often exhibit greater shows of emotion, but it wasn't any as drastic as the book was making it seem. Of course, they did sometimes express immature behavior, but it wasn't like anything Kakashi had seen with the other teams yesterday. Because while Naruto was wild and unpredictable, Kiba was even worse. And where Sakura occasionally got angry and shouted about something, Ino had almost torn her teammates a new one just for messing up her ponytail. And Sasuke, well, Sasuke was Sasuke, and that's all there was to that. But back to the book. Your child also may start showing more interest in and influence by peer groups. Nope, not his kids. He skipped ahead past that part. They might start expressing less affection toward parents, sometimes even seeming rude or short-tempered. He wasn't their parent, how should he know? Teens commonly feel stress from more challenging schoolwork. If anything, they thrived off it, if his rigorous training was anything to go by. But then again, what Kurenai had said came back to him, and he wasn't so sure if his judgment of them was as accurate as he liked to think. He might be pushing them harder than he needed to, and they would just not be speaking up about it because he was their superior. Well, if that was the case, he hoped to change it soon. It wouldn't do anybody any good to run them into the ground. But on the other hand, they really didn't seem to upset or exhausted by it, which only managed to leave him scratching his head in confusion. His thoughts were interrupted by a groan from Sakura, who had stopped walking and was doubled over in what appeared to be pain. Can we stop? She moaned, hair falling in her face. Ma, just a few more miles until we get to the inn, he said. We can rest there. No, Sensei, she said as she looked up, voice taking on a harder tone. I need to stop. Huh. A silver eyebrow rose up Kakashi's forehead as he tried to figure out what she was saying. Then he smelled it when he took a breath. Oh, blood. She was on her period. Shit. Immediately he started panicking. What was he supposed to do? What did Rin do? Was this Sakura's first one? Was she panicking? Did she even know she was on it? Did she even know what it was? Sensei, I'm fine, she said quickly, noticing his paling complexion even though she could only see one eye. I just need to stop in the bushes, she assured. She seems awfully calm for a 12-year-old on her period, he noted absently. Why, do you gotta pee or something? Naruto suddenly asked. Oh, dear lord, was he oblivious? Not exactly, she managed. Frowning, the blonde cocked his head to the side as if in thought, trying to figure out the puzzle. So, oh my god, just don't think about it. Sakura squeaked, already mortified. Just stay there. And with that, she rushed off to the bush, leaving a very confused Naruto in her wake. Sasuke might also have been confused, but he didn't show it. Huh, Naruto finally managed. After a moment's silence, Kakashi strode up to Naruto and put a hand on his shoulder. I'll explain when you're older. And that was all that was said about that chapter 21. They reached the inn by the time the sun started to sink into the horizon. As summer was just about to start, the days were growing longer, leaving them with more hours in the day. It also meant it was later than usual and they were all starving and in need of a good rest. I call shower first, Sakura announced, tossing her bag onto one of the rolled-out futons. Naruto opened his mouth to argue, but Kakashi quickly slapped a gloved hand over it, successfully shutting him up. There was a muffled squawk, but luckily no action was taken to remove said hand. Good. At least his student was smart. Sometime later, when Sasuke was out getting them their meal from the innkeeper and Naruto was in the shower, Kakashi approached Sakura. Now for the moment he'd been dreading. Sakura, he started, voice wavering only slightly. I noticed on the trail today that you had to, God, how was he supposed to say this? Was he even supposed to talk about it? Surely her mother had already covered it. But he was her teacher, which meant he was in charge of her growth and development. But that was only for being a shinobi. No one said anything about, well, the teenage part. I had to, she echoed, looking up at him questioningly. Kakashi coughed awkwardly and rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he'd unfortunately picked up from Naruto. I smelled blood, he tried. And I know it wasn't from an injury, this was so awkward. This was so awkward. And if you've noticed anything odd about your body. Next to him, Sakura's face dropped and turned the color of an Uzumaki's hair. She knew what he was trying to get at. Oh my god. Sensei, please stop. Please, she rushed, hands waving desperately in hopes to shut him up. I know where you're going with this and you really don't need to, she continued. And yeah, I already know what's going on, I mean, you don't have to explain anything, so please, don't. Next to Kakashi was making absolutely zero eye contact. If he were to take off his mask, his face would be the same shade of red as his students'. So, you understand what's going on, then? He asked awkwardly. Yes, she said, voice muffled because her head was now in her hands. And you know what to do. Another muffled yes, this time sounding more like a groan. Okay, he breathed out. Then, good talk, and disappeared out of the room, presumably to help Sasuke with dinner. But really just to escape the situation. When Naruto came out of the shower to see Sakura sitting mortified on the ground, eyes wide and glossy, he decided he didn't want to know. Hey Sensei, Naruto spoke up over dinner. They were sitting in their shared room eating simple rice and curry provided by the inn. It wasn't anything special, but it was filling. Said Sensei replied, absorbed in his book. His bowl was already clean even though they hadn't seen him eat anything. Why do you wear a mask? The question caught him off guard. He blinked. What brought this on? He said as much. Naruto merely shrugged in response. I dunno, he said. It's just, like, we never see you eat or drink and you're always wearing it, so there's gotta be a reason, you know. Kakashi hummed thoughtfully at the response. He would have expected he demand to see what was under it, as most people did. Well, most people didn't demand to know, but they were always thinking it. Looking at the other two genin, he saw similar looks on their faces as Naruto. Curious, but not imposing. Like they wanted to know just as badly, but knew better than to say anything. How very mature of them. Well, he started, setting his book down, still disguised as Ika. What do you know about the Inuzuka? Naruto started. What's that got to do with anything? Kakashi ignored him and gestured for him to answer. Rolling his eyes, Naruto did as he was told. Fine, he sighed dramatically. They're the dog clan. They all have ninkin and are kinda like dogs themselves. Except they all got those weird marking on their cheeks. A pause. Then a loud gasp. Wait, Kakashi-sensei, are you an Inuzuka? Do you have those marks and hide them cause you actually ran away and don't wanna be found out? Don't be an idiot, Naruto, Sakura cried, whacking him on the head and immediately shutting down the train of thought. Kaka-sensei isn't an Inuzuka. And why would he hide it if he was? Besides, he looks nothing like one. Then why'd he bring it up? He moaned back. Ma, go easy on him Sakura, Kakashi tried. I suppose it was a valid question. But, to answer that, no I'm not an Inuzuka. But we do share something in common. The dogs. Naruto tried. Close, he admitted. He didn't want to outright tell them, as that would both ruin the fun as well as stop them from drawing their own conclusions based on little information, as ninja should be able to do. It was Sasuke who reached the conclusion first. Your sense of smell, the Uchiha stated. Kakashi nodded, slightly impressed. It's not a common known fact, but the Hitaki clan possess a very powerful sense of smell, just like the Inuzuka. It makes us great for tracking. However, he added, the Hokages have always had sharper noses than our cousin clan, and sometimes it works a little too well. It's rare, but on occasion a person is born with a hyperactive olfactory center. As useful as that is, humans simply aren't meant to process that amount of input, and it can be debilitating in the long run. Or, in layman's terms, the nose worked too well and whatever poor sap had that could smell literally everything in a clarity not meant for humans to process. And as you might have put together, that is the case with me. A glance at his genin told him the meaning had gotten across to them. So, you wear the mask to basically block out smells. Sakura tried, frowning. Or, as a buffer, rather. He nodded. Correct. For some reason, all three drooped in disappointment. Naruto most of all. It wasn't overly obvious or anything, but definitely more gloomy than before. Ah man, he moaned. I really hoped it was because of buck teeth. Next to him Sasuke rolled his eyes, but Kakashi couldn't help but feel the Uchiha secretly agreed with him. But wait, I still don't get it though, Naruto groaned. Nothing can smell that bad, right? Next to him, Sakura let out an insufferable sigh and leaned over. Naruto, it's like that time you farted in Kiba's face when he had all the chakra in his nose. Remember? But instead it's all the time. Naruto winced at the reminder before the realization seemed to dawn on him. Oh, he breathed. Yeah, that would suck. Kakashi didn't even want to know. The next day brought with it clear skies and the promise of another hot day. Thankfully it was still cool when they packed up and left the inn, as it was still rather early, but Kakashi knew the sun wouldn't wait for long before cooking them. Thankfully though the summer humidity hadn't yet set in, as it was only early June. But he knew it wouldn't last forever. Come the end of the month, Konoha would be filled to the brim with sweaty, lethargic people. But that was just life. The journey to their client only took a few hours, as they'd covered most of the ground yesterday. It was just after lunch that they made it to a reasonably sized farm a few miles outside of the village the festival was being held in. Ah, you're here, the farm owner exclaimed, wrinkled face bright and happy. We weren't expecting you for until sundown. Kakashi just gave him a kind eye smile. Well, we are shinobi. It's our job to be quick. The man let out a laugh at that before ushering them onto his grounds, showing them the way to their guest room. I'm Kato Sakamoto, he introduced. And my daughter is Sarah. You'll see her around, but she's going to be staying here to watch the farm instead of coming with us. Usually it would be my wife that stayed, but Kaito's eyes drifted off into the middle distance in a look all four of the shinobi knew all too well. Well, she's not around anymore, he finished. But, he added, brightening up possibly too enthusiastically. That means I get you four. All four of them, well, three put on what they hoped looked like supportive smiles. Really, it was just Naruto and Sakura who smiled while their sensei tried to make the same expression with only a quarter of his face showing. Needless to say, he didn't quite get the expression across. After being shown their room and letting them unpack, Kato led them around the farm and showed them what needed to be packed up and prepared for the festival. Mostly it was lots of grains and cured meats that needed sorting and packing. Each bag had to be measured and checked off for inventory, then stored in the barn until tomorrow. Kato ran a food stand that was fairly popular each year, and as such had a lot of inventory to bring with him. It was easy work, but it was menial. They finished just before dinner. 3 genin, dirty and sweaty, made it into the house with their sensei in tow, still reading that blasted book of his to find a young girl around their age with brown hair preparing a tasty-looking dish of katsudon. Hi. Naruto immediately greeted as he took off his sandals. You must be Sarah. The girl turned to them with a timid, but earnest smile. You're the shinobi that my dad hired, she said. It's nice to meet you all. She ushered them to take their seats around the table while she started dishing out the meal. A few minutes later, Kato joined them, giving his daughter a quick peck on the cheek before taking his own place at the table. Soon enough, all their bowls were filled with delicious-smelling food. And of course Naruto dug in like his life depended on it. Wow, you're really good at cooking, Naruto said, swallowing a mouthful of rice and pork. This is amazing. Thanks, she blushed. I've had a lot of practice since, well, she trailed off, bubbly demeanor gone. Things have been difficult lately, she admitted, eyes downcast in obvious grief. Mom used to do all the cooking, but now that she's gone. We're sorry to hear about your mom, Sakura offered, genuine sympathy in her voice. I know what it's like to lose someone important to you, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. Unbeknownst to her, Kakashi's eye narrowed at her words, mind already working through what she said with more intellect than he let on. Across from her, Sarah dipped her head in thanks, a sad smile on her face. It happened a while ago, now, she said absently, chopsticks pushing around her rice. But I guess it still hurts. Although Dad and I are managing pretty well, so I think she'd be happy about that. Sakura offered a supportive smile in return. I'm sure, she said. It might be hard now, but trust me when I say things will get easier. Before you know it, you're gonna be doing amazing things on your own. Both Sarah and Kato smiled softly, a hopeful air about them. I hope you're right, Sakura, Kato said. She gave them both an assured nod. Next to her, Kakashi looked as if he were trying to work out a puzzle. It struck Kakashi later that night just what exactly was so different about his students than all the others he'd observed. It was mostly because of what he'd observed during their diner. They were confident in themselves. Not in the body image way or what have you. But in the sense that they knew who they were as people, and had mastered their emotions more or less. While all the other teens were still figuring out where they stood and who they were going to be as shinobi and as people, his three had already figured it out. There was no uncertainty. When Sarah, a girl their age, had turned remorseful over a dead parent, Sakura had stepped right up to comfort her, appearing confident and self-assured. Not awkward at all, as Kakashi knew he would have been at that age when trying to comfort someone, as if he ever would have at that age. And it wasn't just Sakura. Kakashi remembered Bath and Wave when young Inari had broken down at the table and told them they should all give up, and that it was all hopeless. Kakashi would have expected Naruto to jump up and start shouting right back, but instead the boy had surprised him and gave an inspiring speech about not giving up, and fighting for what you believe. It was far too mature for a normal 12-year-old to give. It was curious. So all in all, emotionally, they reminded him of fully fledged Chunin. Chunin have lived the shinobi life and understand loss and pain. Confident and sure in their abilities. Young Chunin, yes, but mature. They even had the same look in their eyes that seasoned shinobi all had. Hardened and weary, but still up to the task. But they were genin. It all made no sense. Sighing, Kakashi accepted that this mystery would continue to elude him until he got more information. Until then, it might just be best to let them be. There wasn't anything wrong with them anyways, so there was no point in trying to fix them. Or at least, he hoped that was the case. Kakashi fell asleep that night with a very uneasy feeling in his gut. Chapter 22. Breakfast was a quick affair the next morning. Simple red bean porridge before they were packing again to help Kato cart everything to the festival. It was early, very early. The sun hadn't even yet broken the horizon as they helped Kato and Sarah start packing everything up onto the carts. They had to do it now to set up the stall in time, as the festival started that afternoon. It was a laborious task, as there were many bundles and sacks of food. At one point Kakashi saw Sakura about to pick up a bag easily 2/3 her weight and stepped in to take over. Only for the girl to lift it as if it were only 10 pounds, swinging it up onto her shoulders and tossing it into the cart with no problem. What the fuck? Sakura caught sight of him staring and immediately froze. Quote. I've been working out, she tried, eyes wide like she'd been caught in the act. Kakashi would have had to be a civilian to be fooled by that. The sun had just started peeking over the trees by the time they were done loading the carts. They all waved bye to Sarah as they group headed off towards the town, smiles wide on their faces, before beginning their trek. The trail was dry and dusty, not helped by the horses pulling the carts that kicked it up into the air. Kakashi was glad he had his mask to block out the particulars, but still. His genin had been on surprisingly good behavior so far, making friendly chit-chat with Kato and occasionally moving a rock out of the road before one of the wagon wheels could hit it. It wasn't necessarily odd behavior, but his book said teens were lazy and complained when tasked to do something they didn't necessarily want to. So by all means they should have been cranky and ill-tempered. And yet none of them seemed to be so. Well, except Sasuke. But that was just who he was. It was mid-morning when they reached the village. Finally, Naruto cried, pumping his fists in the air. I can't wait to see all the stuff set up. Naruto, Sakura butt in. We have to set up first, remember. It's what we were hired to do. Naruto's face dropped at the reminder. Oh, yeah, forgot. Behind him Sasuke rolled his eyes and Sakura just sighed. Alright then, let's get going. He cried. Geez, did this kid have no limit to his energy? Apparently the answer was no, as he helped set up the stall in almost record time, using his shadow clones to speed the process up. Kakashi would have scolded him and said that was the improper use for the jutsu, but he couldn't bring himself to speak up. Besides, it got their work done faster. They finished just as the sun started dipping into the sky. It wasn't yet evening, but in a few hours it would be. If they left now they might make it back to Konoha before midnight. They'd traveled in a relative triangle since leaving, so it wouldn't be too far of a stretch. Maybe. Come on, you three, he drawled, stuffing his hands in his pockets. If we leave now we can make it home tonight. He just wanted to be done and get back to reading his actual Ika, thank you very much. But apparently that was the wrong thing to say, as all three, two, of their faces dropped in dismay, bordering on betrayal. What? Naruto cried, outraged. We're not even gonna stay and enjoy the festival. Ma, why bother? He shrugged. But, what about the food and the fireworks Kato talked about? What about those, We're not even gonna see 'em. He sounded scandalized, as if he couldn't believe Kakashi would deprive them of that. Sensei, Sakura tried, stepping in. We've worked so hard helping Kato and his daughter and have been traveling non-stop. You're really gonna make us go back without even considering letting have a well-earned break? She sounded both hurt and earnest. As our teacher, you're responsible for our growth as both shinobi and as people. It would be irresponsible of you not to indulge us in a reward every now and then. It was a very well-crafted argument, backed up with both facts and puppy eyes. And while Kakashi liked to think he was immune to the latter, it would be a lie, he had to agree with the former. Children needed rewards and breaks. His book had said so, after all. Fine, he relented with a sigh, earning a cheer from two of his students. But only till dark. Then we book it home. His genin nodded in agreement. Later, Kakashi would wonder if that had been a good idea. You can't possibly eat that much, Naruto, Sakura moaned, looking at Naruto's ever-growing bag of sweets and treats. They'd been walking around town for almost an hour, and in the time the boy had managed to get a box of takeout yakisoba, some dango, 4 individual takoyaki, taiyaki, and dorayaki. If Sakura wasn't so concerned for his health when he finally ate all the food, she'd be concerned about his wallet. The food itself hadn't been horrible expensive, it was actually relatively cheap. But when added up together, well, she just hoped the D rank covered it. I'm not gonna eat it all by myself, he scoffed, scandalized as they made their way through the streets. Kakashi Sensei walked just behind them, head still in his goddamn book as the three of them explored the town. So who is then? She asked. You guys, duh. Sakura blinked. Oh, she should have realized that. Before she could respond, one of the vendors called out to them, hey there, you three. You look like strong young kids. Care to try out a test of strength? Turning around, Sakura saw some guy standing next to a tall contraption with a bell on the top, a large hammer resting just next to it. Immediately she knew what it was. And Aso knew that it was rigged, just like every other game on the street. Yeah, you guys. Hey, you, in the blue shirt, he gestured to Sasuke, he glanced boredly over in his direction. You look like a strong young man. Care to try this out? Fair warning, few of the strongest of men can hit that bell. Sakura refrained from rolling her eyes. Talk about a sales pitch. He shrugged dismissively. Not really my thing. The man's face dropped, but only for a second before he turned to Naruto. How about you then? Care to give it a go? Naruto frowned, scratching the back of his head in thought. I dunno. Seems kinda lame to me. Sakura, he asked, turning to her. What do you think? The guy manning the booth just scoffed. No offense, he said, giving obvious offense. But this test of strength isn't meant for a little lady such as yourself. Don't want you to hurt yourself. Okay, Sakura didn't want to do it before, but now she really wanted to. Fuck this guy. Actually, she said thoughtfully, finger to her lips. I think I will give it a try. How much? The man didn't seem entirely thrilled, but she was paying, so he couldn't complain. 100 ryo, he said, mouth almost twisted into a frown. Sakura dug out the money and handed it over. Without a word, he handed her the hammer. Immediately, as if it were heavier than she could manage, she dropped it to the ground, letting out a sound of dismay. The sight made the man smirk. Ha, sucker. Behind her, Naruto and Sasuke quickly backed up behind their sensei, who was giving his student a half-suspicious half-scared look, knowing what she was about to do. Smirking evilly to herself, Sakura tightened her grip on the hammer and readied her stance. The look on the man's face when she broke the bell on top was worth way more than the 100 ryo she paid and the giant stuffed Tsum Tsum Shiba Inu she got as a prize. Totally. Worth it. Sometime later found them outside a stall selling festival masks. Naruto had spotted it and had immediately sprinted over, ogling the display before shooting puppy eyes over at the rest of them, practically begging them to stop so he could buy something. The only thing was, he didn't really have the money for it. His solution. I'm not buying you masks. Kakashi stated. Please. No. Come on, Kaka-sensei, don't be a buzzkill, Naruto moaned. I'm not spending my own hard-earned money on something you'll never use again, he stated monotonously. I'm not doing it. 15 minutes later, they ended up all walking away with Oni, Okami, and Kitsune masks. And a dog won for their beloved sensei, the irony was not lost on them. Later they watched the fireworks from the roof of the inn they'd decided to stay at for the night, deciding to forego the idea of making it back to Konoha before midnight. Their bellies were full of yummy, greasy food, Sakura had won many prizes from various vendors, and Sasuke seemed to actually be enjoying himself. For once, they were all at peace. But they all had a sinking feeling this would be the last time it would be this way for some time. The thought sent a shiver down their spines.